Book of the 1001 Nights. Praise be to Allah, the beneficent King, the creator of the universe. Praise be to him who hath made the histories of the past an admonition unto the present. Now of such instances are the tales called 1,000 Nights and a Night, together with their far-famed legends and wonders. Therein it is related that in time long gone before there was a king in the islands of India and China. He left only 2 sons, one in the prime of manhood and the other yet a youth. Both were knights and braves, albeit the elder was a doughtier horseman than the younger. So he succeeded to the empire, when he ruled the land and lorded it over his lieges with justice so exemplary that he was beloved by all the peoples of his capital and of his kingdom. His name was King Shahryar, and he made his younger brother, Shaman, king of Samarkand in Barbarian land. And each ruled his own kingdom with equity and fair dealing to his subjects, in extreme solace and enjoyment. And this condition endured for a score of years. But at the end of the 20th 12-month, the elder king yearned for a sight of his younger brother, and felt that he must look upon him once more. So he took counsel with his wazir about visiting him. But the minister, finding the project unadvisable, recommended that a letter be written and a present be sent under his charge to the younger brother, with an invitation to visit the elder. Having accepted this advice, the king forthwith bade prepare handsome gifts, such as horses with saddles of gem-encrusted gold, Mamelukes or white slaves, beautiful handmaids, high-breasted virgins, and splendid stuffs and costly. He then wrote a letter to Shahrázad, expressing his warm love and great wish to see him. Then King Shahryar, having sealed the missive and given it to the wazir with the offerings aforementioned, commanded him to make all expedition in going and returning. The minister packed up his loads and prepared all his requisites without delay. This occupied him 3 days, and on the dawn of the 4th he took leave of his king and marched right away, over desert and hillway, stony waste and pleasant lea, without halting by night or by day. When he entered the city, he proceeded straightway to the palace, where he presented himself in the royal presence. And after kissing ground and praying for the king's health and happiness, and for victory over all his enemies, he informed him that his brother was yearning to see him, and prayed for the pleasure of a visit. He then delivered the letter, which Shahrázad took from his hand and read. When the king had fully comprehended its import, he said, "I hear and I obey the commands of the beloved brother," adding to the wazir, "But we will not march till after the 3rd day's hospitality." On the 4th day he made ready for wayfare, and got together sumptuous presents befitting his elder brother's majesty, and established his chief wazir viceroy of the land during his absence. Then he caused his tents and camels and mules to be brought forth, and encamped with their bales and loads, attendants and guards within sight of the city, in readiness to set out next morning for his brother's capital. But when the night was half spent, he bethought him that he had forgotten in his palace somewhat which he should have brought with him. So he returned privily and entered his apartments, where he found the queen, his wife, asleep on his own carpet bed, embracing with both arms a black cook of loathsome aspect, and foul with kitchen grease and grime. When he saw this, the world waxed black before his sight, and he said, "If such case happen while I am yet within sight of the city, what will be the doings of this damned whore during my long absence at my brother's court?" So he drew his scimitar, and cutting the 2 in 4 pieces with a single blow, left them on the carpet and returned presently to his camp, without letting anyone know of what had happened. Then he gave orders for immediate departure, and set out at once and began his travel. But he could not help thinking over his wife's treason, and he kept ever saying to himself, "How could she do this deed by me? How could she work her own death?" Till excessive grief seized him. His colour changed to yellow, his body waxed weak, and he was threatened with a dangerous malady, such an one as bringeth men to die. So the Wazir shortened his stages, and tarried long at the watering stations, and did his best to solace the king. Now when Schahzaman drew near the capital of his brother, he dispatched vaunt couriers and messengers of glad tidings to announce his arrival. And Shahryar came forth to meet him with his wazirs and emirs and lords and grandees of his realm, and saluted him and joyed with exceeding joy, and caused the city to be decorated in his honour. When, however, the brothers met, the elder could not but see the change of complexion in the younger, and questioned him of his case. Whereto he replied, "'Tis caused by the travails of wayfare, and my case needs care, for I have suffered from the change of water and air. But Allah be praised for reuniting me with a brother so dear and so rare." On this wise he dissembled and kept his secret. Then the two entered the capital in all honour, and the elder brother lodged the younger in a palace overhanging the pleasure garden. And after a time, seeing his condition still unchanged, he attributed it to his separation from his country and kingdom. One day his elder brother said to him, "I am going forth to hunt and course, and to take my pleasure and pastime. Maybe this would lighten thy heart." Schahzaman, however, refused, saying, "O my brother, my soul yearneth for naught of this sort, and I entreat thy favour to suffer me tarry quietly in this place, being wholly taken up with my malady." So King Schahzaman passed his night in the palace, and next morning, when his brother had fared forth, he removed from his room and sat him down at one of the lattice windows overlooking the pleasure grounds. And there he abode, thinking with saddest thought over his wife's betrayal. And as he continued in this case, lo, a postern of the palace, which was carefully kept private, swung open, and out of it came 20 slave girls surrounding his brother's wife, who was wondrous fair, a model of beauty and comeliness and symmetry and perfect loveliness, and who paced with the grace of a gazelle which panteth for the cooling stream. Thereupon Schahzaman drew back from the window, but he kept the bevy in sight, espying them from a place whence he could not be espied. They walked under the very lattice, and advanced a little way into the garden, till they came to a jetting fountain, amiddlemost a great basin of water. Then they stripped off their clothes, and behold, 10 of them were women, concubines of the king, and the other 10 were white slaves. Then they all paired off, each with each. But the queen, who was left alone, presently cried out in a loud voice, "Hear to me, O my lord Said!" And then sprang with a drop leap from one of the trees a big, slobbering blackamoor, with rolling eyes, which showed the whites, a truly hideous sight. He walked boldly up to her, and threw his arms round her neck, while she embraced him as warmly. Then he bussed her, and winding his legs around her, as a button loop clasps a button, he threw her and enjoyed her. On likewise did the other slaves with the girls, till all had satisfied their passions, and they ceased not from kissing and clipping, coupling and carousing, till day began to wane, when the Mamelukes rose from the damsels' bosoms, and the blackamoor slave dismounted from the queen's breast. The men resumed their disguises, and all, except the negro who swarmed up the tree, entered the palace and closed the postern door as before. Now when Schahzaman saw this conduct of his sister-in-law, he said in himself, "By Allah, my calamity is lighter than this. My brother is a greater king among the kings than I am, yet this infamy goeth on in his very palace, and his wife is in love with the filthiest of filthy slaves. But this only showeth that they all do it, and that there is no woman but who cuckoldeth her husband. Then the curse of Allah upon one and all, and upon the fools who lean against them for support, or who place the reins of conduct in their hands." So he put away his melancholy and despondency, regret and repine, and allayed his sorrow by constantly repeating those words, adding, "'Tis my conviction that no man in this world is safe from their malice." Next day he broke his fast heartily, and began to recover health and strength, and presently regained excellent condition. His brother came back from the chase 10 days after, when he rode out to meet him, and they saluted each other. And when King Shahryar looked at King Shah-Zaman, he saw how the hue of health had returned to him, how his face had waxed ruddy, and how he ate with an appetite after his late scanty diet. He wondered much and said, I beseech thee to expound to me the cause of thy complaint and thy change of colour, and to explain the reason of thy recovery and the return to the ruddy hue of health which I am wont to view. So speak out, and hide naught. Know then, O my brother, rejoined Shah-Zaman, that when thou sentest thy wazir with the invitation to place myself between thy hands, I made ready and marched out of my city. But presently I minded me, having left behind me in the palace a string of jewels intended as a gift to thee. I returned for it alone, and found my wife on my carpet bed and in the arms of a hideous black cook. So I slew the twain and came to thee. Yet my thoughts brooded over this business, and I lost my bloom and became weak. But excuse me if I still refuse to tell thee what was the reason of my complexion returning. Shahryar shook his head, marvelling with extreme marvel, and with a fire of wrath flaming up from his heart, he cried, Indeed, the malice of woman is mighty. By Allah, had the case been mine, I would not have been satisfied without slaying 1,000 women, and that way madness lies. But now praise be to Allah, who hath tempered to thee thy tribulation, and needs must thou acquaint me with that which so suddenly restored to thee complexion and health, and explain to me what causeth this concealment. O King of the age, again I pray thee excuse my so doing. Nay, but thou must. Thereupon Shah-Zaman told him all he had seen, from commencement to conclusion, ending with these words, When I beheld thy calamity and the treason of thy wife, O my brother, and I reflected that thou art in years my senior and in sovereignty my superior, mine own sorrow was belittled by the comparison, and my mind recovered tone and temper. So throwing off melancholy and despondency, I was able to eat and drink and sleep, and thus I speedily regained health and strength. Such is the truth and the whole truth. When King Shahryar heard this, he waxed wroth with exceeding wrath, and rage was like to strangle him. But presently he recovered himself and said, O my brother, I would not give thee the lie in this matter, but I cannot credit it till I see it with mine own eyes. And thou wouldst look upon thy calamity, quoth Shah-Zaman. Rise at once and make ready again for hunting and coursing, and then hide thyself with me. So shalt thou witness it, and thine eyes shall verify it. Then the brothers disguised themselves and returned by night with all secrecy to the palace, where they passed the dark hours. And at dawn they seated themselves at the lattice overlooking the pleasure grounds, when presently the queen and her handmaids came out as before, and passing under the windows made for the fountain. Here they stripped, 10 of them being men to 10 women, and the king's wife cried out, Where art thou, O Sayyid? The hideous blackamoor dropped from the tree straightway, and rushing into our arms without stay or delay, cried out, I am Sa'ad al-Din Saud. The lady laughed heartily, and all fell to satisfying their lusts, and remained so occupied for a couple of hours, when the white slaves rose up from the handmaidens' breasts, and the blackamoor dismounted from the queen's bosom. Then they went into the basin, and after performing the ghusl, or complete ablution, donned their dresses, and retired as they had done before. When King Shahryar saw this infamy of his wife and concubines, he became as one distraught, and he cried out, Only in utter solitude can man be safe from the doings of this vile world. By Allah, life is naught but one great wrong. Then he sat him upon his throne, and sending for the chief minister, the father of the 2 damsels, who will presently be mentioned, he said, I command thee to take my wife and smite her to death, for she hath broken her plight and her faith. So he carried her to the place of execution, and did her die. Then King Shahryar took brand in hand, and repairing to the seraglio, slew all the concubines and their Mamelukes. He also sware himself by a binding oath that whatever wife he married, he would abate her maidenhead at night, and slay her next morning to make sure of his honour. For, said he, there never was, nor is there one chaste woman upon the face of earth. Then Shahrázad prayed for permission to fare homewards, and he went forth equipped and escorted, and travelled till he reached his own country. Meanwhile Shahryar commanded his wazir to bring him the bride of the night, that he might go in to her. So he produced a most beautiful girl, the daughter of one of the emirs, and the king went in unto her at eventide, and when morning dawned, he bade his minister strike off her head. The wazir did accordingly, for fear of the sultan. On this wise he continued for the space of 3 years, marrying a maid and departed rulers. She had produced the works of be. And she answered, Even so. Hereupon the wazir went up to King Shahryar, and after blessing him and kissing the ground before him, told him all about his talk with his daughter, and how he designed to bring her to him that night. The king wondered with exceeding wonder, for he had made an especial exception for the wazir's daughter, and said to him, O most faithful of counsellors, how is this? Thou wottest that I have sworn by the rays of the heavens that after I have gone into her this night, I shall say to thee on the morrow's morning, Take her and slay her, and if thou slay her not, I will slay thee in her stead without fail. Allah guide thee to glory and lengthen thy life, O king of the age, answered the wazir. It is she that hath so determined. All this have I told her and more, but she will not hearken to me, and she persisteth in passing this coming night with the king's majesty. So Shahryar rejoiced greatly and said, 'Tis well. Go get her ready, and this night bring her to me. The wazir returned to his daughter, and reported to her the command, saying, Allah make not thy father desolate by thy loss. But Scheherazade rejoiced with exceeding joy, and got ready all she required, and said to her younger sister, Sindbad, Note well what directions I entrust to thee. When I have gone into the king, I will send for thee, and when thou comest to me, and seest that he hath had his carnal will of me, do thou say to me, O my sister, an thou be not sleepy, relate to me some new story, delectable and delightsome, better to speed our waking hours. And I will tell thee a tale which shall be our deliverance, if so Allah please, and which shall turn the king from his bloodthirsty custom. Dunyazad answered, With love and gladness. So when it was night, their father the wazir carried Scheherazade to the king, who was gladdened at the sight, and asked, Hast thou brought me my need? And he answered, I have. But when the king took her to his bed, and fell to toying with her, and wished to go in to her, she wept, which made him ask, What aileth thee? She replied, O king of the age, I have a younger sister, and lief would I take leave of her this night, before I see the dawn. So he sent at once for Dunyazad, and she came and kissed the ground between his hands, when he permitted her to take her seat near the foot of the couch. Then the king arose, and did away with his bride's maidenhead, and the three fell asleep. But when it was midnight, Shahrázad awoke, had signalled to her sister, who sat up and said, Allah upon thee, O my sister, recite to us some new story, delectable, wherewith to while away the waking hours of our latter night. With joy and goodly gree, answered Scheherazade, if this pious and auspicious king permit me. Tell on, quoth the king, who chanced to be sleepless and restless, and therefore was pleased with the prospect of hearing her story. So Shahrázad rejoiced, and thus, on the first night of the 1,000 Nights and a Night, she began Barber's tale, telling of a barber of Baghdad who prided himself on his discretion, wise counsel, and common sense, although in truth he was a man of many words and a meddler in other men's affairs. Finding himself in company one day with the Caliph of Baghdad, and being called upon to tell a story, he began thus, relating the barber's tale of himself. I was living in Baghdad during the times of Al-Mustansir Billah, a prince who loved the poor and needy and companied with the learned and pious. One day, 10 persons, highwaymen who robbed on the Caliph's highway, and he ordered the prefect of Baghdad to bring them into his presence on the anniversary of the great festival. So the prefect sallied out across the river, and making them his prisoners, embarked with them in barking, and said to myself, these are surely assembled for a marriage feast. Methinks they are spending their day in that boat, eating and drinking, and none shall be companions of their cups but I myself. So I rose, O fair assembly, and of the excess of my courtesy and the gravity of my understanding, I embarked with them, and entered into conversation with them. They rowed across to the opposite bank, where they landed. And there came up the watch and guardians of the peace with chains, which they put round the robbers' necks. They chained me among the rest of them. And, O people, is it not a proof of my courtesy and spareness of speech that I held my peace and did not please to speak? Then they took us away in chains, and next morning carried us all before Al-Mustansir Billah, commander of the faithful, who bade smite the necks of the 10 robbers. So the sworder came forward, and drawing his blade, struck off one head after another, until he had smitten the neck of the 10th. And I alone remained. The Caliph looked at me, and asked the headsman, saying, What ails thee that hast struck off only 9 heads? And he answered, Allah forbid that I should behead only 9, when thou biddest me behead 10. Quoth the Caliph, Seems thou hast smitten the necks of only 9, and this man before thee is the 10th. By thy beneficence, replied the headsman, I have beheaded 10. Count them, cried the Caliph, and whenas they counted heads, lo, there were 10. The Caliph said, What made thee keep silence at a time like this, and how camest thou to company with these men of blood? Tell me the cause of all this. Thou art a very old man. Assuredly thy wits are weak. Now when I heard these words from the Caliph, I sprang to my feet and replied, Know, O Prince of the Faithful, that I am the silent Sheikh, and am thus called to distinguish me from my 6 brothers. I am a man of immense learning, whilst, as for the gravity of my understanding, and the wiliness of my wits, and the spareness of my speech, there is no end to them, and my calling is that of a barber. I went out early on yesterday morning, and saw these men in a skiff, and fancying they were bound for a marriage feast, I joined them and mixed with them. After a while, up came the watch and guardians of the peace, who put chains round their necks and round mine with the rest. In the excess of my courtesy, I held my peace and spake not a word, nor was this other but generosity on my part. They brought us into thy presence, and thou gavest an order to smite the necks of the 10. Yet did I not make myself known to thee, and remain silent before the sworder, purely of my great generosity and courtesy, which led me to share with them in their death. But all my life long I have dealt thus nobly with mankind, and they requite me the foulest and evilest requital. When the Caliph heard my words, and knew that I was a man of exceeding generosity and of very few words, he laughed with excessive laughter upon his back. Then he said to me, "O silent man, do thy 6 brothers favour thee in wisdom and knowledge and spareness of speech? Never were they like me. Thou puttest reproach upon me, O commander of the faithful, and it becomes thee not to even my brothers with me. For the abundance of their speech and their deficiency of courtesy and gravity, each has gotten some maim or other. One is a monocular, another palsied, a third stone-blind, a fourth cropped of ears and nose, and a fifth shorn of both lips, while the 6th is a hunchback and a cripple. And conceive not, O commander of the faithful, that I am prodigal of speech, but I must perforce explain to thee that I am a man of greater worth and fewer words than any of them. From each one of my brothers hangs a tale of how he came by his bodily defect, and these I will relate to thee." So the Caliph gave ear to the barber's tale of his first brother. Know then, O commander of the faithful, that my first brother, Al-Bakbuk, prattler, is a hunchback who took to tailoring in Baghdad, and he used to sew in a shop hired from a man of much wealth, who dwelt over the shop, and there was also a flour mill in the basement. One day, as my brother, the hunchback, was sitting in his shop, he chanced to raise his head, and saw a lady like the rising full moon at a balconied window of his landlord's house, engaged in looking out at the passers-by. When my brother beheld her, his heart was taken with love of her, and he passed his whole day gazing at her and neglected his tailoring till eventide. Next morning he opened the shop and sat him down to sew, but as often as he stitched a stitch, he looked to the window and saw her as before, and his passion and infatuation for her increased. The 3rd day, as he was sitting in his usual place, gazing on her, she caught sight of him, and perceiving that he had been captivated with love of her, laughed in his face, and he smiled back at her. Then she disappeared, and presently sent her slave girl to him, containing a piece of red flowered silk. The handmaid accosted him and said, "My lady salameth to thee, and desireth thee of thy skill and goodwill to fashion for her a shift of this piece, and to sew it handsomely with thy best sewing." He replied, "Hearkening and obedience," and shaped for her a chemise, and finished sewing it the same day. When the morning morrowed, the girl came back to him. "My lady salameth to thee, and asks how thou hast passed yesternight, for she hath not tasted sleep by reason of her heart being taken up with thee." Then she laid before him a piece of yellow satin, and said, "He biddeth thee cut her 2 pair of petticoat trousers out of this piece, and sew them this very day." "Hearkening and obedience," replied he. "Greet her for me with many greetings, and say to her, Thy slave is obedient to thine order. So command him as thou wilt." Then he applied himself to cutting out, and worked hard at sewing the trousers. And after an hour the lady appeared at the lattice, and saluted him by signs, now casting down her eyes, then smiling in his face, and he began to himself that he would soon conquest. She did not let him stir till he had finished the 2 pair of trousers, when she withdrew and sent the handmaid to whom he delivered them, and she took them and went her ways. When it was night, he lay on his carpet bed, and lay tossing about from side to side till morning, when he rose and sat down in his place. Presently the damsel came to him and said, My master calleth for thee. Hearing these words, he feared with exceeding fear. But the slave girl, seeing his affright, said to him, No evil is meant to thee, naught but good awaiteth thee. My lady would have thee make acquaintance with my lord. So my brother the tailor, rejoicing with great joy, went with her. And when he came into the presence of his landlord, the lady's husband, he kissed the ground before him, and the master of the house returned his greeting and gave him a great piece of linen, saying, Shape me shirts out of this stuff, and sew them well. And my brother answered, To hear is to obey. Thereupon he fell to work at once, snipping, shaping, and sewing, till he had finished 20 shirts without stopping to taste food. The housemaster asked him, How much the wage for this? And he answered, 20 dirhams. So the gentleman cried out to the slave girl, Bring me 20 dirhams. And my brother spake not a word. But the lady signed, Take nothing from him. Whereupon my brother said, By Allah, I will take naught from thy hand. And he carried off his tailor's gear and returned to his shop, although he was destitute. Then he do their work, eating in his zeal and diligence but a bit of bread, and drinking only a little water for 3 days. At the end of this time came the handmaid and said to him, What hast thou done? Quoth he, They are finished, and carried the shirts to the lady's husband, who would have paid him his hire. But he said, I will take nothing, for fear of losing her, and returning to his shop, passed the night without sleep, because of his hunger. Now the dame had informed her husband how the case stood, my brother knowing of this, and the two had agreed to make him tailor for nothing, the better to mock and laugh at him. Next morning he went to his shop, and as he sat there, the handmaid came to him and said, With my master. So he accompanied her to the husband, who said to him, I wish thee to cut out for me 5 long-sleeved robes. So he cut them out, and took the stuff, and went away. Then he sewed them, and carried them to the gentleman, who praised his sewing, and offered some silver. He put out his hand to take it, but the lady signed to him from behind the husband not to do so, and he replied, O my lord, there is no hurry, we have time enough for this. Then he went forth from the house, meaner and meeker than a donkey, for verily 5 things were gathered together in him, viz., love, beggary, hunger, nakedness, and hard labour. Nevertheless, he heartened himself with the hope of gaining the lady's favours. When he had made an end of all their jobs, they played him another trick, and married him to their slave girl. But on the night when he thought to go into her, they said to him, Lie in the mill, and tomorrow all will go well. My brother concluded that there was some good cause for this, and nighted alone in the mill. Now the husband had set on the miller to make the tailor turn the mill. So when night was half spent, the man came in to him and began to say, This fool of ours hath become useless, and standeth still instead of going round. He will not turn the mill this night, and yet we have great store of corn to be ground. However, I'll yoke him perforce, and make him finish grinding it before morning, as the folk are impatient for their flour. So he filled the hoppers with grain, and going up to my brother with a rope in his hand, tied it round his neck, and said to him, Up, round with a mill, thou, O bull, wouldst do nothing but grub and stale dung. Then he took a whip, and laid it on the shoulders and calves of my brother, who began to bellow, but none came to help him, and he was forced to grind the wheat till hard upon dawn, when the housemaster came in, and seeing my brother still tethered to the yoke, and the man flogging him, went away. At daybreak the miller returned home, and left him still yoked and half dead. And soon after in came the slave girl, who unbound him, and said to him, I and my lady are right sorry for what hath happened, and we have borne thy grief with thee. But he had no tongue wherewith to answer her, from excess of beating and mill turning. Then he retired to his lodging, and behold, the clerk, who had drawn up the marriage to him, and saluted him, saying, Allah give thee long life. May thy espousal be blessed. Thy face telleth of pleasant doings and dalliance and kissing and clipping from dusk to dawn. Allah grant the liar no peace, O thou thousandfold cuckold. My brother replied, By Allah, I did nothing but turn the mill in the place of the bull all night till morning. Tell me thy tale, quoth he. And my brother recounted what had befallen him, and he said, Thy star agrees not with her star. But an thou wilt, I can alter the contract for thee, adding, Beware lest another cheat be not in store for thee. And my brother answered him, See if thou have not another contrivance. Then the clerk left him. He sat in his shop, looking for someone to bring him a job whereby he might earn his day's bread. Presently the handmaid came to him and said, Speak with my lady. Begone, O my good girl, replied he. There shall be no more dealings between me and thy lady. The handmaid turned to her mistress and told her what my brother had said. And presently she put her head out of the window, weeping and saying, Why, O my beloved, are there to be no more dealings twixt me and thee? But he made her no answer. Then she wept and conjured him, declaring that all which had befallen him in the mill was not sanctioned by her, and that she was innocent of the whole matter. When he looked upon her beauty and loveliness, and heard the sweetness of her speech, the sorrow which had possessed him passed from his heart. He accepted her excuse, and he rejoiced in her sight. So he saluted her, and talked with her, and sat tailoring a while, after which the handmaid came to him and said, My mistress greeteth thee, and informeth thee that her husband purposeth to lie abroad this night in the house of some intimate friends of his. So when he is gone, do thou come to us, and spend the night in delightsomest joyance till the morning. Now her husband had asked her, How shall we manage to turn him away from thee? And she answered, Leave me to play him another trick, and make him a laughing-stock for the whole town. But my brother knew naught of the malice of women. As soon as it was dusk, the slave girl came to him, and carried him to the house. And when the lady saw him, she said to him, By Allah, O my lord, I have been longing exceedingly for thee. By Allah, cried he, kiss me quick, before thou give me aught else. Hardly had he spoken, when the lady's husband came in from the next room, and seized him, saying, By Allah, I will not let thee go, till I deliver thee to the chief of the town watch. My brother humbled himself to him, but he would not listen to him, and carried him before the prefect, who gave him 100 lashes with a whip, and mounting him on a camel, promenaded him round about the city, whilst the guards proclaimed aloud, This is his reward who violateth the harems of honourable men. Moreover, he fell off the camel and broke his leg, and so became lame. Then the prefect banished him from the city, and he went forth, unknowing whither he should wend. But I heard of him, and fearing for him, went out after him, and brought him back secretly to the city, and him to health, and took him into my house, where he still liveth. The Caliph laughed at my story and said, Thou hast done, O summit, O silent man, O spare of speech. And he bade me take a present and go away. But I said, I will accept naught of thee, except I tell thee what befell all my other brothers, and do not think me a man of many words. So the Caliph gave ear to the barber's tale of his second brother. Know, O Commander of the Faithful, that my second brother's name was Al-Hadar, that is, the babbler, and he was a paralytic. Now it happened to him one day, as he was going about his business, that an old woman accosted him and said, Stop a little, my good man, that I may tell thee of somewhat which, if it be to thy liking, thou shalt do for me, and I will pray Allah to give thee good of it. My brother stopped, and she went on, I will put thee in the way of a certain thing, so thou not be prodigal of speech. On with thy talk, quoth he, and she, What sayest thou to handsome quarters, and a fair garden with flowing waters, flowers blooming, and fruit growing, and old wine going, and a pretty young face, whose owner thou mayest embrace from dark till dawn? If thou do whatso I bid thee, thou shalt see something greatly to thy advantage. And is all this in the world? Asked my brother. And she answered, Yes, and it shall be thine, so thou be reasonable, and leave idle curiosity and many words, and do my bidding. I will indeed, O my lady, said he. How is it that thou hast preferred me in this matter before all men, and what is it that so much pleaseth thee in me? Quoth she, Did I not bid thee be spare of speech? Hold thy peace, and follow me. Know that the young lady to whom I shall carry thee loveth to have her own way, and hateth being thwarted, and all who gainsay. So, if thou humour her, thou shalt come to thy desire of her. And my brother said, I will not cross her in anything. Then she went on, and my brother followed her, and hungering after what she described to him, till they entered a fine large house, handsome and choicely furnished, full of eunuchs and servants, and showing signs of prosperity from top to bottom. And she was carrying him to the upper story, when the people of the house said to him, What dost thou here? But the old woman answered them, Hold your peace, and trouble him not. He is a workman, and we have occasion for him. Then she brought him into a fine great pavilion, with a garden in its midst. Never eyes saw a fairer, and made him sit upon a handsome couch. He had not sat long before he heard a loud noise, and in came a troop of slave girls, surrounding a lady like the moon on the night of its fullest. When he saw her, he rose up and made an obeisance to her, whereupon she welcomed him and bade him be seated. So he sat down, and she said to him, Allah advance thee to honour. Is all well with thee? O my lady, he answered, all with me is right well. Then she bade bring in food, and they sat before her delicate viands. So she sat down to eat, making a show of affection to my brother, and jesting with him, though all the while she could not refrain from laughing. But as often as he looked at her, she signed towards her handmaidens, as though she were laughing at them. My brother, the ass, understood nothing, but in the excess of his ridiculous passion, he fancied that the lady was in love with him, and that she would soon grant him his desire. When they had done eating, they set on the wine, and there came in 10 maidens like moons, with lutes ready strung in their hands, and fell to singing with full voices, sweet and sad, whereupon delight gat hold upon him, and he took the cup from the lady's hands, and drank it standing. Then she drank a cup of wine, and my brother, still standing, said to her, Health, and bowed to her. She handed him another cup, and he drank it off, when she slapped him hard on the nape of his neck. Upon this my brother would have gone out of the house in anger, but the old woman followed him, and winked to him to return. So he came back, and the lady bade him sit, and he sat down without a word. Then she again slapped him on the nape of his neck, and the second slapping did not suffice her. She must needs make all her handmaidens also slap and cuff him, while he kept saying to the old woman, I never saw aught nicer than this. She, on her side, ceased not exclaiming, Enough, enough, I conjure thee, O my mistress. But the women slapped him till he well nigh swooned away. Presently my brother rose and went out to obey a call of nature. But the old woman overtook him and said, Be patient a little, and thou shalt win to thy wish. How much longer have I to wait? My brother replied. This slapping hath made me feel faint. As soon as she is warm with wine, answered she, thou shalt have thy desire. So he returned to his place and sat down, whereupon all the handmaidens stood up, and the lady bade them perfume him with pastils and besprinkle his face with rose water. Then said she to him, Allah advance thee to honour. Thou hast entered my house, and hast borne with my conditions. For whoso thwarteth me, I turn him away, and whoso is patient hath his desire. O mistress mine, said he, I am thy slave, and in the hollow of thine hand. Know, then, continued she, that Allah hath made me passionately fond of frolic, and whoso falleth in with my humour cometh by whatso he wisheth. Then she ordered her maidens to sing with loud voices till the whole company was delighted. After which she said to one of them, Take thy lord, and do what is needful for him, and bring him back to me forthright. So the damsel took my brother, and he not knowing what she would do with him. But the old woman overtook him and said, Be patient, there remaineth but little to do. At this his face brightened, and he stood up before the lady, while the old woman kept saying, Be patient, thou wilt now at once win to thy wish. Till he said, Tell me what she would have the maiden do with me. Nothing but good, replied she, as I am thy sacrifice. She wisheth only to dye thy eyebrows and pluck out thy mustachios. Quoth he, As for dyeing of my eyebrows, that will come off with washing. But for the plucking out of my mustachios, that indeed is a somewhat painful process. Be cautious how thou cross her, cried the old woman, for she hath set her heart on thee. So my brother patiently suffered her to dye his eyebrows and pluck out his mustachios. After which the maiden returned to her mistress and told her. Quoth she, Remaineth now only one thing to be done. Thou must shave his beard and make him a smooth of face. So the maiden went back and told him what her mistress had bidden her to do, and my brother, the blockhead, said to her, How shall I do what will disgrace me before the folk? But the old woman said, She would do on this wise only that thou mayest be as a beardless youth, and that no hair be left on thy face to scratch and prick her delicate cheeks. For indeed she is passionately in love with thee. So be patient, and thou shalt attain thine object. My brother was patient, and did her bidding, and let shave off his beard, and when he was brought back to the lady, lo, he appeared dyed red as to his eyebrows, plucked off both mustachios, shorn of his beard, rouged on both cheeks. At first she was affrighted at him. Then she made mockery of him, and laughing till she fell upon her back, said, O my lord, thou hast indeed won my heart by thy good nature. Then she conjured him, by her life, to stand up and dance. And he arose and capered about, and there was not a cushion in the house but she threw it at his head, and in like manner did all her women, who also kept pelting him with oranges and lemons and citrons, till he fell down senseless from the cuffing on the nape of the neck, the pillowing, and the fruit pelting. Now thou hast attained thy wish, said the old woman when he came round. There are no more blows in store for thee, and there remaineth but one little thing to do. It is her wont, when she is in her cups, to let no one have her until she put off her dress and trousers, and remain stark naked. Then she will bid thee doff thy clothes and run, and she will run before thee as if she were flying from thee. And do thou follow her from place to place till thy prickle stands at fullest point, when she will yield to thee, adding, Strip off thy clothes at once. So he rose, well nigh lost in ecstasy, and doffing his raiment, showed himself mother naked. Whereupon the lady stripped also, and said to my brother, If thou want anything, run after me till thou catch me. Then she set out at a run, and he ran after her, while she rushed into room after room, and rushed out of room after room, my brother scampering after her in a rage of desire, like a veritable madman, with yard standing terribly tall. After much of this kind, she dashed into a darkened place, and he dashed after her. But suddenly he trod upon a yielding spot, which gave way under his weight, and before he was aware where he was, he found himself in the midst of a crowded market, part of the bazaar of the leather sellers who were crying the prices of skins and hides and buying and selling. When they saw him in his plight, naked, with standing yard, shorn of beard and mustachios, with eyebrows dyed red and cheeks ruddled with rouge, they shouted and clapped their hands at him, and set to flogging him with skins upon his bare body till a swoon came over him. Then they threw him on the back of an ass and carried him to the chief of police. Quoth the chief, "What is this?" Quoth they, "This fellow fell suddenly upon us out of the wazir's house in this state." So the prefect gave him 100 lashes and then banished him from Baghdad. However, I went out after him and brought him back secretly into the city and made him a daily allowance for his living, although, were it not for my generous humour, I could not have put up with the like of him. And so endeth the barber's tale of his second brother. There lived in the city of Baghdad, during the reign of the commander of the faithful Harun al-Rashid, a man named Sindbad the porter, one in poor case who bore burdens on his head for hire. Now it happened one day of great heat that he rested a while outside the house of his namesake, Sindbad the Seaman, a man of exceeding wealth, who came to that estate after travail sore and perils galore. Sindbad the Seaman, hearing from his doorkeeper that a poor man who bore his own name rested outside his walls, called him in for refreshment, and began to tell him and the assembled company the story of his first voyage. Sindbad the porter was invited to return upon the morrow, when his illustrious namesake recounted in these words the narrative of the second voyage of Sindbad the Seaman. Now when Sindbad the Seaman's guests were all gathered together, he thus bespake them. I was living a most enjoyable life until one day my mind became possessed with the thought of travelling about the world of men and seeing their cities and islands. And a longing seized me to traffic and to make money by trade. Upon this resolve, I took a great store of cash and, buying goods and gear fit for travel, bound them up in bales. Then I went down to the river bank, where I found a noble ship and brand new about to sail, equipped with sails of fine cloth and well manned and provided. So I took passage in her, with a number of other merchants, and after embarking our goods, we weighed anchor the same day. Right fair was our voyage, and we sailed from place to place and from isle to isle, and whenever we anchored, we met a crowd of merchants and notables and customers, and we took to buying and selling and bartering. At last destiny brought us to an island, fair and verdant, in trees abundant, with yellow ripe fruits luxuriant, and flowers fragrant, and birds warbling soft descant, and streams crystalline and radiant. But no sign of man showed to the descrier. The captain made fast with us to this island, and the merchants and sailors landed and walked about, enjoying the shade of the trees and the song of the birds, that chanted the praises of the one, the victorious, and marvelling at the works of the omnipotent king. I landed with the rest, and sitting down by a spring of sweet water that welled up among the trees, took out some vivers I had with me, and ate of that which Allah Almighty had allotted unto me. And so sweet was the zephyr, and so fragrant were the flowers, that presently I waxed drowsy, and lying down in that place, was soon drowned in sleep. When I awoke, I found myself alone, for the ship had sailed and left me behind. Nor had one of the merchants or sailors bethought himself of me. I searched the island right and left, but found neither man nor jinn, whereat I was beyond measure troubled, and my gall was like to burst for stress of chagrin and anguish and concern, because I was left quite alone, without aught of worldly gear, or meat or drink, weary and heartbroken. So I gave myself up for lost, and said, Not always doth the crook escape the shock. I was saved the first time by finding one who brought me from the desert island to an inhabited place, but now there is no hope for me. Then I fell to weeping and wailing, and gave myself up to an excess of rage, blaming myself for having again ventured upon the perils and hardships of voyage, whenas I was at my ease in my own house, in my own land, taking my pleasure with good meat and good drink and good clothes, and lacking nothing, neither money nor goods. And I repented me of having left Baghdad, and this the more after all the travails and dangers I had undergone in my first voyage, wherein I had so narrowly escaped destruction, and exclaimed, Verily we are Allah's, and unto him we are returning. I was indeed even as one mad and gin-struck, and presently I rose and walked about the island, right and left and every whither, unable for trouble to sit or tarry in any one place. Then I climbed a tall tree and looked in all directions, but saw nothing save sky and sea and trees and birds and isles and sands. However, after a while my eager glances fell upon some great white thing, afar off in the interior of the island. So I came down from the tree and made for that which I had seen. And behold, it was a huge white dome, rising high in air and of vast compass. I walked all round it, but found no door thereto, nor could I muster strength or nimbleness by reason of its exceeding smoothness and slipperiness. So I marked the spot where I stood, and went round about the dome to measure its circumference, which I found 50 good paces. And as I stood, casting about how to gain an entrance, the day being near its fall and the sun being near the horizon, behold, the sun was suddenly hidden from me, and the air became dull and dark. Methought a cloud had come over the sun, but it was the season of summer. So I marvelled at this, and lifting my head, looked steadfastly at the sky, when I saw that the cloud was none other than an enormous bird of gigantic girth and inordinately wide of wing, which, as it flew through the air, veiled the sun and hid it from the island. My wonder redoubled, and I remembered a story I had heard aforetime of pilgrims and travellers, how in a certain island dwelleth a huge bird called the Roc, which feedeth its young on elephants. And I was certified that the dome which caught my sight was none other than a roc's egg. As I looked and wondered at the marvellous works of the Almighty, the bird alighted on the dome and brooded over it with its wings covering it, and its legs stretched out behind it on the ground, and in this posture it fell asleep. Glory be to him who sleepeth not. When I saw this, I arose, and unwinding my turban from my head, doubled it and twisted it into a rope, which I girt my middle and bound my waist fast to the legs of the rock, saying in myself, Peradventure, this bird may carry me to a land of cities and inhabitants, and that will be better than abiding in this desert island. I passed the night watching and fearing to sleep, lest the bird should fly away with me unawares. And as soon as the dawn broke and morn shone, the roc rose off its egg, and spreading its wings with a great cry, flew up into the air, dragging me with it. Nor ceased it to soar and to tower till I thought it had reached the limit of the firmament. After which it descended earthwards, little by little, till it lighted on the top of a high hill. As soon as I found myself on the hard ground, I made haste to unbind myself, quaking for fear of the bird, though it took no heed of me, nor even felt me, and loosing my turban from its feet, I made off with my best speed. Presently I saw it catch up in its huge claws something from the earth, and rise with it high in air, and observing it narrowly, I saw it to be a serpent, big of bulk and gigantic of girth, wherewith it flew away clean out of sight. I marvelled at this, and faring forwards, found myself on a peak overlooking a valley, exceeding great and wide and deep, and bounded by vast mountains that spired high in air. None could descry their summits for the excess of their height, nor was any able to climb up thereto. When I saw this, I blamed myself for that which I had done, and said, Would heaven I had tarried in the island! It was better than this wild desert, for there I had at least fruits to eat and water to drink, and here are neither trees nor fruits nor streams. But there is no majesty and there is no might save in Allah the glorious, the great. Verily, as often as I am quit of one peril, I fall into a worse danger and a more grievous. However, I took courage, and walking along the wadi, found that its soil was of diamond, the stone wherewith they pierce minerals and precious stones and porcelain and the onyx, for that it is a dense stone and a dure, whereon neither iron nor hardhead hath effect, neither can we cut off aught therefrom, nor break it, save by means of leadstone. Moreover, the valley swarmed with snakes and vipers, each big as a palm tree, that would have made but one gulp of an elephant. And they came out by night, hiding during the day, lest the rooks and eagles pounce on them and tear them to pieces, as was their wont, why I wot not. And I repented of what I had done, and said, By Allah, I have made haste to bring destruction upon myself. The day began to wane as I went along, and I looked about for a place where I might pass the night, being in fear of the serpents. And I took no thought of meat and drink in my concern for my life. Presently I caught sight of a cave near hand with a narrow doorway, so I entered, and seeing a great stone close to the mouth, I rolled it up and stopped the entrance, saying to myself, I am safe here for the night, and as soon as it is day, I will go forth and see what destiny will do. Then I looked within the cave, and saw at the upper end a great serpent brooding on her eggs, at which my flesh quaked and my hair stood on end. But I raised my eyes to heaven, and committing my case to fate and lot, abode all that night without sleep till daybreak, when I rolled back the stone from the mouth of the cave and went forth, staggering like a drunken man, and giddy with watching and fear and hunger. As in this sore case I walked along the valley, behold, there fell down before me a slaughtered beast. But I saw no one, whereat I marvelled with great marvel, and presently remembered a story I had heard aforetime of traders and pilgrims and travellers, how the mountains where are the diamonds are full of perils and terrors, nor can any fare through them. But the merchants who traffic in diamonds have a device by which they obtain them. That is to say, they take a sheep, and slaughter and skin it, and cut it in pieces, and cast them down from the mountain tops into the valley sole, where the meat being fresh and sticky with blood, some of the gems cleave to it. There they leave it till midday, when the eagles and vultures swoop down upon it, and carry it in their claws to the mountain summits, whereupon the merchants come and shout at them, and scare them away from the meat. Then they come, and taking the diamonds, which they find sticking to it, go their ways with them, and leave the meat to the birds and beasts. Nor can any come at the diamonds, but by this device. So when I saw the slaughtered beast fall, and bethought me of the story, I went up to it, and filled my pockets and shore girdle, and turband, and the folds of my clothes, with the choicest diamonds. And as I was thus engaged, down fell before me another great piece of meat. Then, with my unrolled turband, and lying on my back, I set the bit on my breast, so that I was hidden by the meat, which was thus raised above the ground. Hardly had I gripped it, when an eagle swooped down upon the flesh, and seizing it with his talons, flew up with it high in air, and me clinging thereto, and ceased not its flight till it alighted on the head of one of the mountains, where, dropping the carcass, he fell to rending it. But behold, there arose behind him a great noise of shouting and clattering of wood, whereat the bird took fright and flew away. Then I loosed off myself the meat, with clothes daubed with blood therefrom, and stood up by its side. Whereupon up came the merchant, who had cried out at the eagle, and seeing me standing there, bespoke me not, but was affrighted at me, and shook with fear. However, he went up to the carcass, and turning it over, found no diamond sticking to it. Whereat he gave a great cry, and exclaimed, Hurrah, my disappointment! There is no majesty, and there is no might, save in Allah, with whom we seek refuge from Satan the stoned. And he bemoaned himself, and beat hand upon hand, saying, Alas, the pity of it! How cometh this? Then I went up to him, and he said to me, Who art thou, and what causeth thee to come hither? And I, Fear not, I am a man, and a good man, and a merchant. My story is wondrous, and my adventures marvellous, and the manner of my coming hither is prodigious. So be of good cheer. Thou shalt receive of me what shall rejoice thee, for I have with me great plenty of diamonds, and I will give thee thereof what shall suffice thee. for each is better than aught thou couldst get otherwise, so fear nothing." The man rejoiced thereat, and thanked and blessed me. Then we talked together, till the other merchants, hearing me in discourse with their fellow, came up and saluted me, for each of them had thrown down his piece of meat. And as I went off with them, I told them my whole story, how I had suffered hardships at sea, and the fashion of my reaching the valley. But I gave the owner of the meat a number of the stones I had by me. So they all wished me joy of my escape, saying, "By Allah, a new life hath been decreed to thee, for none ever reached yonder valley, and came off thence alive before thee. But praised be Allah for thy safety." We passed the night together in a safe and pleasant place, beyond measure rejoiced at my deliverance from the Valley of Serpents, and my arrival in an inhabited land. And on the morrow we set out and journeyed over the mighty range of mountains, seeing many serpents in the valley, till we came to a fair great island, wherein was a garden of huge camphor trees, under each of which 100 men might take shelter. When the folk have a mind to get camphor, they bore into the upper part of the bowl with a long iron, whereupon the liquid camphor, which is the sap of the tree, floweth out, and they catch it in vessels, which it concreteth like gum. But after this the tree dieth, and become firewood. Moreover, there is in this island a kind of wild beast, called rhinoceros, that pastureth, as do steers and buffaloes with us. But it is a huge brute, bigger of body than the camel, and like it feedeth upon the leaves and twigs of trees. It is a remarkable animal, with a great and thick horn, 10 cubits long, and middleward its head, wherein, when cleft in twain, is the likeness of a man. Voyagers and pilgrims and travellers declare that this beast, called Carcadan, will carry off a great elephant on its horn, and graze about the island and the sea-coast therewith, and take no heed of it, till the elephant dieth, and its fat, melting in the sun, runneth down into the rhinoceros's eyes, and blindeth him, so that he lieth down on the shore. Then comes the bird Ruch, and carrieth off both the rhinoceros and that which is on its horn, to feed its young withal. Moreover, I saw in this island many kinds of oxen and buffaloes, whose like are not found in our country. Here I sold some of the diamonds which I had by me for gold dinars and silver dirhams, and bartered others for the produce of the country. And loading them upon beasts of burden, fared on with the merchants from valley to valley and town to town, buying and selling and viewing foreign countries and the works and creatures of Allah, till we came to Basra city, where we abode a few days, after which I continued my journey to Baghdad. I foregathered with my friends and relations, and gave alms and largesse, and bestowed curious gifts, and made presents to all my friends and companions. Then I betook myself to eating well and drinking well, and wearing fine clothes, and making merry with my fellows, and forgot all my sufferings in the pleasures of return to the solace and delight of life, with light heart and broadened breast. And every one who heard of my return came and questioned me of my adventures and of foreign countries, and I related to them all that had befallen me, and the much I had suffered, whereat they wondered and gave me joy of my safe return. This, then, is the end of the story of my second voyage, and tomorrow, inshallah, I will tell you what befell me in my third voyage. The third voyage of Sindbad the Seaman. As I told you yesterday, I returned from my second voyage overjoyed at my safety and with great increase of wealth, Allah having requited me all that I had wasted and lost, and I abode a while in Baghdad city, savouring the utmost ease and prosperity and comfort and happiness, till the carnal man was once more seized with longing for travel and diversion and adventure, and yearned after traffic and lucre and emolument, for that the human heart is naturally prone to evil. So making up my mind, I laid in great plenty of goods suitable for a sea voyage, and repairing to Bassorah, went down to the shore and found there a fine ship ready to sail, with a full crew and a numerous company of merchants, men of worth and substance, faith, piety, and consideration. I embarked with them, and we set sail on the blessing of Allah Almighty, and on his aidance and his favour, to bring our voyage to a safe and prosperous issue, and already we congratulated one another on our good fortune and boon voyage. We fared on from sea to sea, and from island to island, and city to city, in all delight and contentment, buying and selling wherever we touched, and taking our solace and our pleasure, till one day, when, as we sailed athwart the dashing sea, swollen with clashing billows, behold, the master, who stood on the gunwale examining the ocean in all directions, cried out with a great cry, and buffeted his face, and plucked out his beard, and rent his raiment, and bade furl the sail and cast the anchors. So we said to him, O master, what is the matter? Know, O my brethren, Allah preserve you, that the wind hath gotten the better of us, and hath driven us out of our course into mid-ocean, and destiny, for our ill luck, hath brought us to the mountain of the Zugb, a hairy folk like apes, among whom no man ever fell and came forth alive, and my heart presageth that we all be dead men. Hardly had the master made an end of his speech, when the apes were upon us. They surrounded the ship on all sides, swarming like locusts, and crowding the shore. They were the most frightful of wild creatures, covered with black hair like felt, foul of favour and small of stature, being but 4 spans high, yellow-eyed and black-faced. None knoweth their language nor what they are, and they shun the company of men. We fear to slay them or strike them or drive them away, because of their inconceivable multitude, lest, if we hurt one, the rest fall on us and slay us, for numbers prevail over courage. So we let them do their will, albeit we feared they would plunder our goods and gear. They swarmed up the cables and gnawed them asunder, and on likewise they did with all the ropes of the ship, so that it fell off in the wind and stranded upon their mountainous coast. Then they laid hands on all the merchants and crew, and landing us on the island, made off with the ship and its cargo, and went their ways, we wot not whither. We were thus left on the island, eating of its fruits and potherbs, and drinking of its streams, till one day we espied in its midst what seemed an inhabited house. So we made for it as fast as our feet could carry us, and behold, it was a castle, strong and tall, compassed about with a lofty wall, and having a 2-leaved gate of ebony wood, both of which leaves open stood. We entered, and found within a space, wide and bare like a great square, round which stood many high doors open thrown, and at the farther end a long bench of stone and braziers, with cooking gear hanging thereon, and about it great plenty of bones. But we saw no one, and marvelled thereat with exceeding wonder. Then we sat down in the courtyard a little while, and presently, falling asleep, slept from the forenoon till sundown, when, lo, the earth trembled under our feet, and the air rumbled with a terrible tone. Then there came down upon us, from the top of the castle, a huge creature in the likeness of a man, black of colour, tall and big of bulk, as he were a great date tree, with eyes like coals of fire, and eye-teeth like boar's tusks, and a vast big gape like the mouth of a well. Moreover, he had long loose lips, like camels, hanging down upon his breast, and ears like 2 jugs falling over his shoulder blades, and the nails of his hands were like the claws of a lion. When we saw this frightful giant, we were like to faint, and every moment increased our fear and terror, and we became as dead men for excess of horror and affright. And after trampling upon the earth, he sat a while on the bench. Then he arose, and coming to us, seized me by the arm, choosing me out from among my comrades, the merchants. He took me up in his hand, and turning me over, felt me, as a butcher feeleth a sheep he is about to slaughter, and I but a little mouthful in his hands. but finding me lean and fleshless for stress of toil and trouble and weariness, let me go and took up another, whom in like manner he turned over and felt and let go. Nor did he cease to feel and turn over the rest of us, one after another, till he came to the master of the ship. Now he was a sturdy, stout, broad-shouldered wight, fat and in full vigour. So he pleased the giant, who seized him as a butcher seizeth a beast, and throwing him down, set his foot on his neck and brake it. After which he fetched a long spit, and thrusting it up his backside, brought it forth of the crown of his head. Then, lighting a fierce fire, he set over it the spit with a master thereon, and turned it over the coals till the flesh was roasted, when he took the spit off the fire and set it like a kebab stick before him. Then he tare the body limb from limb, as one jointeth a chicken, and rending the flesh with his nails, fell to eating of it, and gnawing the bones, till there was nothing left but some of these, which he threw on one side of the wall. This done, he sat for a while. Then he lay down on the stone bench and fell asleep, snarking and snoring like the gurgling of a lamb or a cow with its throat cut. Nor did he awake till morning, when he rose and fared forth and went his ways. As soon as we were certified that he was gone, we began to talk with one another, weeping and bemoaning ourselves for the risk we ran, and saying, "Would heaven we had been drowned in the sea, or that the apes had eaten us. That were better than to be roasted over the coals. By Allah, this is a vile, foul death. But whatso the Lord willeth must come to pass, and there is no majesty, and there is no might, save in him, the glorious, the great. We shall assuredly perish miserably, and none will know of us, as there is no escape for us from this place." Then we arose and roamed about the island, hoping that haply we might find a place to hide us in, or a means of flight, for indeed death was a light matter to us, provided we were not roasted over the fire and eaten. However, we could find no hiding place, and the evening overtook us. So, of the excess of our terror, we returned to the castle and sat down a while. Presently the earth trembled under our feet, and the black ogre came up to us, and turning us over, felt one after another, till he found a man to his liking, whom he took and served as he had done the captain, killing and roasting and eating him. After which he lay down on the bench and slept all night, snarking and snoring like a beast with its throat cut, till daybreak, when he arose and went out as before. Then we drew together and conversed, and said one to the other, "By Allah, we had better throw ourselves into the sea and be drowned than die roasted, for this is an abominable death." Quoth one of us, "Hear ye my words. Let us cast about to kill him, and be at peace from the grief of him, and rid the Muslims of his barbarity and tyranny." Then said I, "Hear me, O my brothers. If there is nothing for it but to slay him, let us carry some of this firewood and planks down to the seashore, and make us a boat, wherein, if we succeed in slaughtering him, we may either embark and let the waters carry us whither Allah willeth, or else abide here till some ship pass, when we will take passage in it. If we fail to kill him, we will embark in the boat and put out to sea, and if we be drowned, we shall at least escape being roasted over a kitchen fire with sliced weasons. Whilst, if we escape, we escape, and if we be drowned, we die martyrs." "By Allah," said they all, "this rede is a right." And we agreed upon this, and set about carrying it out. So we haled down to the beach the pieces of wood which lay about the bench, and making a boat, moored it to the strand, after which we stowed therein somewhat of victual, and returned to the castle. As soon as evening fell, the earth trembled under our feet, and in came the blackamoor upon us, snarling like a dog about to bite. He came up to us, and feeling us and turning us over one by one, took one of us, and did with him as he had done before, and ate him, after which he lay down on the bench, and snored and snorted like thunder. As soon as we were assured that he slept, we arose, and taking 2 iron spits of those standing there, heated them in the fiercest of the fire, till they were red hot, like burning coals, when we gripped fast hold of them, and going up to the giant, as he lay snoring on the bench, thrust them into his eyes, and pressed upon them, all of us, with our united might, so that his eyeballs burst, and he became stone blind. Thereupon he cried with a great cry, whereat our hearts trembled, and springing up from the bench, he fell a-groping after us, blindfold. We fled from him right and left, and he saw us not, for his sight was altogether blent. And we were in terrible fear of him, and made sure we were dead men, despairing of escape. Then he found the door, feeling for it with his hands, and went out roaring aloud. And behold, the earth shook under us for the noise of his roaring, and we quaked for fear. As he quitted the castle, we followed him, and betook ourselves to the place where we had moored our boat, saying to one another, If this accursed abide absent till the going down of the sun, and come not to the castle, we shall know that he is dead. And if he come back, we will embark in the boat and paddle till we escape, committing our affair to Allah. But as we spoke, behold, up came the blackamoor with other two, as they were ghouls, fouler and more frightful than he, with eyes like red-hot coals, which when we saw, we hurried into the boat, and casting off the moorings, paddled away and pushed out to sea. As soon as the ogres caught sight of us, they cried out at us, and running down to the seashore, fell a-pelting us with rocks, whereof some fell amongst us, and others fell into the sea. We paddled with all our might, till we were beyond their reach. But the most part of us were slain by the rock-throwing, and the winds and waves sported with us, and carried us into the midst of the dashing sea, swollen with billows clashing. We knew not whither we went, and my fellows died one after another, till there remained but three, myself and two others. We were sore exhausted for stress of hunger, but we took courage and heartened one another, and worked for dear life, and paddled with main and might, till the winds cast us upon an island, as we were dead men for fatigue and fear and famine. We landed on the island, and walked about it for a while, finding that it abounded in trees and streams and birds, and we ate of the fruits, and rejoiced in our escape from the black, and our deliverance from the perils of the sea. And thus we did till nightfall, when we lay down and fell asleep for excess of fatigue. But we had hardly closed our eyes before we were aroused by a hissing sound, like the sough of wind, and awaking, saw a serpent like a dragon, a seld-seen sight, of monstrous make, and belly of enormous bulk, which lay in a circle around us. Presently it reared its head, and seizing one of my companions, swallowed him up to his shoulders. Then it gulped down the rest of him, and we heard his ribs crack in its belly. Presently it went its way, and we abode in sore amazement and grief for our comrade, and mortal fear for ourselves, saying, By Allah, this is a marvellous thing. Each kind of death that threateneth us is more terrible than the last. We were rejoicing in our escape from the black ogre, and our deliverance from the perils of the sea, but now we have fallen into that which is worse. There is no majesty, and there is no might save in Allah. By the Almighty, we have escaped from the blackamoor and from drowning, but how shall we escape from this abominable and viperish monster? Then we walked about the island, eating of its fruits and drinking of its streams till dusk, when we climbed up into a high tree and went to sleep there, I being on the topmost bough. As soon as it was dark night, up came the serpent, looking right and left, and making for the tree whereon we were, climbed up to my comrade, and swallowed him down to his shoulders. Then it coiled about the bowl within him, whilst I, who could not take my eyes off the sight, heard his bones crack in its belly, and it swallowed him whole, after which it slid down from the tree. When the day broke, and the light showed me that the serpent was gone, I came down, as I were a dead man for stress of fear and anguish, and thought to cast myself into the sea, and be at rest from the woes of the world, but could not bring myself to this, for verily life is dear. So I took 5 pieces of wood, broad and long, and bound one crosswise to the soles of my feet, and others in like fashion on my right and left sides and over my breast. And then the broadest and largest I bound across my head, and made them fast with ropes. Then I lay down on the ground on my back, so that I was completely fenced in by the pieces of wood, which enclosed me like a bear. So as soon as it was dark, up came the serpent, as usual, and made towards me, but could not get at me to swallow me for the wood that fenced me in. So it wriggled round me on every side, whilst I looked on, like one dead by reason of my terror, and every now and then it would glide away and come back. But as often as it tried to come at me, it was hindered by the pieces of wood wherewith I had bound myself on every side. It ceased not to beset me thus from sundown till dawn, but when the light of day shone upon the beast, it made off, in the utmost fury and extreme disappointment. Then I put out my hand and unbound myself, well nigh down among the dead men for fear and suffering, and went down to the island shore, whence a ship afar off in the midst of the waves suddenly struck my sight. So I tore off a great branch of a tree, and made signs with it to the crew, shouting out the while, which when the ship's company saw, they said to one another, "We must stand in and see what this is. Peradventure 'tis a man." So they made for the island, and presently heard my cries, whereupon they took me on board, and questioned me of my case. I told them all my adventures from first to last, whereat they marvelled mightily, and covered my shame with some of their clothes. Moreover, they set before me somewhat of food, and I ate my fill, and I drank cold sweet water, and was mightily refreshed. And Allah Almighty quickened me, after I was virtually dead. So I praised the Most Highest, and thanked him for his favours and exceeding mercies, and my heart revived in me after utter despair, till meseemed as if all I had suffered were but a dream I had dreamed. We sailed on with a fair wind the Almighty sent us, till we came to an island called Al-Salahita, which aboundeth in sandalwood. And when we had cast anchor, the merchants and the sailors landed with their goods to sell and to buy. And then the captain turned to me and said, "Harkye, thou art a stranger and a pauper, and tellest us that thou hast undergone frightful hardships. Wherefore I have a mind to benefit thee with somewhat that may further thee to thy native land, so thou wilt ever bless me and pray for me." "So be it," answered I, "thou shalt have my prayers." Quoth he, "Know then that there was with us a man, a traveller, whom we lost, and we know not if he be alive or dead, for we had no news of him. So I purpose to commit his bales of good to thy charge, that thou mayst sell them in this island. A part of the proceeds we will give thee as an equivalent of thy pains and service, and the rest we will keep till we return to Baghdad, where we will inquire for his family and deliver it to them together with the unsold goods. Say me then, wilt thou undertake the charge, and land and sell them as other merchants do?" I replied, "Hearkening and obedience to thee, O my lord, and great is thy kindness to me," and thanked him. Whereupon he bade the sailors and porters bear the bales in question ashore and commit them to my charge. The ship's scribe asked him, "O master, what bales are these, and what merchant's name shall I write upon them?" And he answered, "Write on them the name of Sindbad the Seaman, him who was with us in the ship, and whom we lost at the Rocks Island, and of whom we have no tidings. For we mean this stranger to sell them, and we will give him a part of the price for his pains, and keep the rest till we return to Baghdad, where, if we find the owner, we will make it over to him, and if not, to his family." And the clerk said, "Thy words are apposite, and thy rede is right." Now when I heard the captain give orders for the bales to be inscribed with my name, I said to myself, "By Allah, I am Sindbad the Seaman." So I armed myself with courage and patience, and waited till all the merchants had landed and were gathered together, talking and chaffing about buying and selling. Then I went up to the captain and asked him, "O my lord, knowest thou what manner of man was this Sindbad, whose goods thou hast committed to me for sale?" And he answered, "I know of him naught save that he was a man from Baghdad city, Sindbad called the Seaman, who was drowned with many others when we lay anchored at such an island, and I have heard nothing of him since then." At this I cried out with a great cry and said, "O captain, whom Allah keep, know that I am Sindbad the Seaman, and that I was not drowned, but when thou castest anchor at the island, I landed with the rest of the merchants and crew, and I sat down in a pleasant place by myself, and ate somewhat of food I had with me, and enjoyed myself, till I became drowsy and was drowned in sleep. And when I awoke, I found no ship and none near me. These goods are my goods, these bales are my bales, And all the merchants who fetch jewels from the Valley of Diamonds saw me there, and will bear me witness that I am the very Sindbad the Seaman. For I related to them everything that had befallen me, and told them how you forgot me, and left me sleeping on the island, and that betided me which betided me. When the passengers and crew heard my words, they gathered about me, and some of them believed me, and others disbelieved. But presently, behold, one of the merchants, hearing me mention the Valley of Diamonds, came up to me and said to them, "Hear what I say, good people. When I related to you the most wonderful thing in my travels, and I told you that, at the time we cast down our slaughtered animals into the Valley of Serpents, I casting with the rest, as was my wont, there came up a man hanging on to my beast. Ye believed me not, and gave me the lie. Yes, quoth they, thou didst tell us some such tale, but we had no call to credit thee. He resumed, Now this is the very man, by token that he gave me diamonds of great value and high price, whose like are not to be found, requiting me more than would have come up sticking to my quarter of meat. And I companied with him to Bassorah city, where he took leave of us and went on to his native stead, whilst we returned to our own land. This is he. And he told us his name, Sindbad the Seaman, and how the ship left him on the desert island. And know ye that Allah hath sent him hither, so might the truth of my story be made manifest to you. Moreover, these are his goods, for when he first foregathered with us, he told us of them, and the truth of his words is patent." Hearing the merchant's speech, the captain came up to me and considered me straightly a while, after which he said, "What was the mark on thy bales?" "Thus and thus," answered I, and reminded him of somewhat that had passed between him and me when I shipped with him from Bassorah. Thereupon he was convinced that I was indeed Sindbad the Seaman, and took me round the neck, and gave me joy of my safety, saying, "By Allah, O my lord, thy case is indeed wondrous, and thy tale marvellous. But lauded be Allah, who hath brought thee and me together again, and who hath restored to thee thy goods and gear." Then I disposed of my merchandise to the best of my skill, and profited largely on them, whereat I rejoiced with exceeding joy, and congratulated myself on my safety and the recovery of my goods. We ceased not to buy and sell at the several islands till we came to the land of Hind, where we bought cloves and ginger and all manner spices. And thence we fared on to the land of Sind, where also we bought and sold. In these Indian seas I saw wonders without number or count. Amongst them a fish like a cow, which bringeth forth its young, and suckleth them like human beings. And of its skin bucklers are made. There were eke fishes like asses, and camels and tortoises 20 cubits wide. And I saw also a bird that cometh out of a seashell, and layeth eggs, and hatcheth her chicks on the surface of the water, never coming up from the sea to the land. Then we set sail again with a fair wind and the blessing of Almighty Allah, and after a prosperous voyage arrived safe and sound at Bassorah. Here I abode a few days, and presently returned to Baghdad, where I went at once to my quarter and my house, and saluted my family and familiars and friends. I had gained on this voyage what was beyond count and reckoning, so I gave alms and largesse, and clad the widow and the orphan, by way of thanksgiving for my happy return, and fell to feasting and making merry with my companions and intimates, and forgot, while eating well and drinking well and dressing well, everything that had befallen me, and all the perils and hardships I had suffered. These, then, are the most admirable things I sighted on my third voyage, and tomorrow, an it be the will of Allah, you shall come to me, and I will relate the adventures of my fourth voyage, which is still more wonderful than those you have already heard. The fourth voyage of Sindbad the Seaman. Know, O my brethren, that after my return from my third voyage, and foregathering with my friends, and forgetting all my perils and hardships in the enjoyment of ease and comfort and repose, I was visited one day by a company of merchants who sat down with me and talked of foreign travel and traffic, till the old bad man within me yearned to go with them and enjoy the sight of strange countries. And I longed for the society of the various races of mankind, and for traffic and profit. So I resolved to travel with them, and buying the necessaries for a long voyage and great store of costly goods, more than ever before, transported them from Baghdad to Bassorah, where I took ship with the merchants in question, who were of the chief of the town. We set out, trusting in the blessing of Almighty Allah, and with a favouring breeze and the best conditions, we sailed from island to island and sea to sea, till one day there arose against us a contrary wind, and the captain cast out his anchors and brought the ship to a standstill, fearing lest she should founder in mid-ocean. Then we all fell to prayer, and humbling ourselves before the Most High. But as we were thus engaged, there smote us a furious squall, which tore the sails to rags and tatters. The anchor cable parted, and the ship foundering, we were cast into the sea, goods and all. I kept myself afloat by swimming half the day, till, when I had given myself up for lost, the Almighty threw in my way one of the planks of the ship, whereon I and some others of the merchants scrambled, and mounting it as we would a horse, paddled with our feet in the sea. We abode thus a day and a night, the wind and waves helping us on, and on the second day, shortly before the mid-time between sunrise and noon, the breeze freshened, and the sea wrought, and the rising waves cast us upon an island, well nigh dead bodies, for weariness and want of sleep, cold and hunger, and fear and thirst. We walked upon the shore, and found abundance of herbs, whereof we ate enough to keep breath in body, and to stay our failing spirits. Then lay down and slept till morning, hard by the sea. And when morning came with its sheen and shone, we arose and walked about the island to the right and left, till we came in sight of an inhabited house afar off. So we made towards it, and ceased not walking till we reached the door thereof, when, lo, a number of naked men issued from it, and without saluting us, or a word said, laid hold of us masterfully, and carried us to their king, who signed us to sit. So we sat down, and they set food before us, such as we knew not, and whose like we had never seen in our lives. My companions ate of it for stress of hunger, but my stomach revolted from it, and I would not eat. And my refraining from it was, by Allah's favour, the cause of my being alive till now, for no sooner had my comrades tasted of it than their reason fled and their condition changed, and they began to devour it like madmen possessed of an evil spirit. Then the savages gave them to drink of coconut oil, and anointed them therewith. And straightway after drinking thereof, their eyes turned into their heads, and they fell to eating greedily against their wont. When I saw this, I was confounded and concerned for them, nor was I less anxious about myself, for fear of the naked folk. So I watched them narrowly, and it was not long before I discovered them to be a tribe of Magian cannibals, whose king was a ghoul. All who came to their country, or whoso they caught in their valleys, or on their roads, they brought to this king, and fed them upon that food, and anointed them with that oil, whereupon their stomachs dilated, that they might eat largely, whilst their reason fled, and they lost the power of thought, and became idiots. Then they stuffed them with coconut oil, and the aforesaid food, till they became fat and gross, when they slaughtered them by cutting their throats, and roasted them for the king's eating. But as for the savages themselves, they ate human flesh raw. When I saw this, I was sore dismayed for myself and my comrades, who were now become so stupefied that they knew not what was done with them, and the naked folk committed them to one who used every day to lead them out, and pastured them on the island like cattle. And they wandered amongst the trees, and rested at will, thus waxing very fat. As for me, I wasted away, and became sickly for fear and hunger, and my flesh shrivelled on my bones, which when the savages saw, they left me alone, and took no thought of me, and so far forgot me, that one day I gave them the slip, and walking out of their place, made for the beach, which was distant. And there espied a very old man, seated on a high place, girt by the waters. I looked at him, and knew him for the herdsman who had charge of pasturing my fellows, and with him were many others in like case. As soon as he saw me, he knew me to be in possession of my reason, and not afflicted like the rest whom he was pasturing, so signed to me from afar, as who should say, Turn back, and take the right-hand road, for that will lead thee into the king's highway. So I turned back, as he bade me, and followed the right-hand road, now running for fear, and then walking leisurely to rest me, till I was out of the old man's sight. By this time the sun had gone down, and the darkness set in. So I sat down to rest, and would have slept. But sleep came not to me that night, for stress of fear and famine and fatigue. When the night was half spent, I rose and walked on, till the day broke in all its beauty, and the sun rose over the heads of the lofty hills and athwart the low gravelly plains. Now I was weary and hungry and thirsty, so I ate my fill of herbs and grasses that grew in the island, and kept life in body, and stayed my stomach, after which I set out again, and fared on all that day and the next night, staying my greed with roots and herbs. Nor did I cease walking for 7 days and their nights, till the morn of the 8th day, when I caught sight of a faint object in the distance. So I made towards it, though my heart quaked for all I had suffered first and last. And behold, it was a company of men gathering pepper grains. As soon as they saw me, they hastened up to me, and surrounding me on all sides, said to me, Who art thou, and whence come? I acquainted them with all the hardships and perils I had suffered, and how I had fled from the savages. Whereat they marvelled and gave me joy of my safety, saying, By Allah, this is wonderful. But how didst thou escape from these blacks who swarm in the island, and devour all who fall in with them? Nor is any safe from them, nor can any get out of their clutches. And after I had told them of the fate of my companions, they made me sit by them, till they got quit to their work, and fetched me somewhat of good food, which I ate, for I was hungry, and rested a while. After which they took ship with me, and carrying me to their island home, brought me before their king, who returned my salute, and received me honourably, and questioned me of my case. I told him all that had befallen me from the day of my leaving Baghdad city. Whereupon he wondered with great wonder at my adventures, he and his courtiers, and bade me sit by him. Then he called for food, and I ate with him what sufficed me, and washed my hands, and returned thanks to Almighty Allah for all his favours, praising him and glorifying him. Then I left the king, and walked for solace about the city, which I found wealthy and populous, abounding in market streets, well stocked with food and merchandise, and full of buyers and sellers. So I rejoiced at having reached so pleasant a place, and took my ease there after my fatigues. And I made friends with the townsfolk. Nor was it long before I became more in honour and favour with them and their king than any of the chief men of the realm. Now I saw that all the citizens, great and small, rode fine horses, high-priced and thoroughbred, without saddles or housings. Whereat I wondered, and said to the king, Wherefore, O my lord, dost thou not ride with a saddle? Therein is ease for the rider, and increase of power. What is a saddle? Asked he. I never saw nor used such a thing in all my life. And I answered, With thy permission I will make thee a saddle, that thou mayest ride on it, and see the comfort thereof. And quoth he, Do so. So quoth I to him, Furnish me with some wood. Which being brought, I sought me a clever carpenter, and sitting by him showed him how to make the saddle tree, portraying for him the fashion thereof in ink on the wood. Then I took wool, and teased it, and made felt of it, and covering the saddle tree with leather, stuffed it, and polished it, and attached the girth and stirrup leathers. After which I fetched a blacksmith, and described to him the fashion of the stirrups and bridle bit. So he forged a fine pair of stirrups and a bit, and filed them smooth, and tinned them. Moreover, I made fast to them fringes of silk, and fitted bridle leathers to the bit. Then I fetched one of the best of the royal horses, and saddling and bridling him, hung the stirrups to the saddle, and led him to the king. The thing took his fancy, and he thanked me. Then he mounted, and rejoiced greatly in the saddle, and rewarded me handsomely for my work. When the king's vizier saw the saddle, he asked of me one like it, and I made it for him. Furthermore, all the grandees and officers of state came for saddles to me, so I fell to making saddles, having taught the craft to the carpenter and blacksmith, and selling them to all who sought, till I amassed great wealth, and became in high honour and great favour with the king and his household and grandees. I abode thus till one day, as I was sitting with the king in all respect and contentment, he said to me, Know thou, O such an one, thou art become one of us, dear as a brother, and we hold thee in such regard and affection that we cannot part with thee, nor suffer thee to leave our city. Wherefore I desire of thee obedience in a certain matter, and I will not have thee gainsay me. Answered I, O king, what is it thou desirest of me? Far be it from me to gainsay thee in aught, for I am indebted to thee for many favours and bounties and much kindness, and, praised be Allah, I am become one of thy servants. Quoth he, I have a mind to marry thee to a fair, clever, and agreeable wife, who is wealthy as she is beautiful. So thou mayest be naturalized and domiciled with us. I will lodge thee with me in my palace, wherefore oppose me not, neither cross me in this. When I heard these words, I was ashamed and held my peace, nor could make him any answer, by reason of my much bashfulness before him. Asked he, Why dost thou not reply to me, O my son? And I answered, saying, O my master, it is thine to command, O king of the age. So he summoned the Qazi and the witnesses, and married me straightway to a lady of a noble tree and high pedigree, wealthy in moneys and means, the flower of an ancient race, of surpassing beauty and grace, and the owner of farms and estates, and many a dwelling place. Now, after the king my master had married me to this choice wife, he also gave me a great and goodly house standing alone, together with slaves and officers, and assigned me pay and allowances. So I became in all ease and contentment and delight, and forgot everything which had befallen me of weariness and trouble and hardship. For I loved my wife with fondest love, and she loved me no less. And we were as one, and abode in the utmost comfort of life, and in its happiness. And I said to myself, When I return to my native land, I will carry her with me. But whatso is predestined to a man, that needs must be, and none knoweth what shall befall him. We lived thus a great while, till Almighty Allah bereft one of my neighbours of his wife. Now he was a gossip of mine, so hearing the cry of the keeners, I went in to condole with him on his loss, and found him in very ill plight, full of trouble and weary of soul and mind. I condoled with him and comforted him, saying, Mourn not for thy wife, who hath now found the mercy of Allah. The Lord will surely give thee a better in her stead, and thy name shall be great, and thy life shall be long in the land, Inshallah. But he wept bitter tears and replied, O my friend, how can I marry another wife? And how shall Allah replace her to me with a better than she, when I have but one day left to live? O my brother, said I, return to thy senses, and announce not the glad tidings of thine own death, for thou art well, sound, and in good case. By thy life, O my friend, rejoined he, tomorrow thou wilt lose me, and wilt never see me again till the day of resurrection. I asked, How so? And he answered, This very day they bury my wife, and they bury me with her in one tomb. For it is the custom with us, if the wife die first, to bury the husband alive with her, and in like manner the wife, if the husband die first, so that neither may enjoy life after losing his or her mate. By Allah, cried I, this is a most vile, lewd custom, and not to be endured of any. Meanwhile, behold, the most part of the townsfolk came in, and fell to condoling with my gossip for his wife and for himself. Presently they laid the dead woman out, as was their wont, and setting her on a bier, carried her and her husband without the city, till they came to a place in the side of a mountain at the end of the island by the sea. And here they raised a great rock, and discovered the mouth of a stone-riveted pit or well, leading down into a vast underground cavern that ran beneath the mountain. Into this pit they threw the corpse. Then tying a rope of palm fibres under the husband's armpits, They let him down into the cavern, and with him a great pitcher of fresh water and 7 scones by way of provision. When he came to the bottom, he loosed himself from the rope, and they drew it up. And stopping the mouth of the pit with a great stone, they returned to the city, leaving my friend in the cavern with his dead wife. When I saw this, I said to myself, "By Allah, this fashion of death is more grievous than the first." And I went to the king and said to him, "O my lord, why do ye bury the quick with the dead?" Quoth he, "It hath been the custom, thou must know, of our forebears and our olden kings from time immemorial, if the husband die first, to bury his wife with him, and the like with the wife, so we may not sever them, alive or dead." I asked, "O king of the age, if the wife of a foreigner like myself die among you, deal ye with him as with yonder man?" And he answered, "Assuredly, we do with him even as thou hast seen." When I heard this, my gallbladder was like to burst. For the violence of my dismay and concern for myself, my wit became dazed. I felt as if in a vile dungeon, and hated their society. For I went about in fear lest my wife should die before me, and they bury me alive with her. However, after a while, I comforted myself, saying, "Haply I shall predecease her, or shall have returned to my own land before she die, for none knoweth which shall go first, and which shall go last." Then I applied myself to diverting my mind from this thought with various occupations. But it was not long before my wife sickened and complained, and took to her pillow, and fared, after a few days, to the mercy of Allah. And the king and the rest of the folk came, as was their wont, to condole with me and her family, and to console us for her loss, and not less to condole with me for myself. Then the women washed her, and arraying her in her richest raiment and golden ornaments, necklaces and jewellery, laid her on the bier, and bore her to the mountain aforesaid, where they lifted the cover of the pit, and cast her in. After which all my intimates and acquaintances, and my wife's kith and kin came round me, to farewell me in my lifetime, and console me for my own death, whilst I cried out among them, saying, "Almighty Allah never made it lawful to bury the quick with the dead. I am a stranger, not one of your kind, and I cannot bear your custom, and had I known it, I would never have wedded among you." They heard me not, and paid no heed to my words, but laying hold of me, bound me by force, and let me down into the cavern, with a large gugglet of sweet water and 7 cakes of bread, according to their custom. When I came to the bottom, they called out to me to cast myself loose from the cords, but I refused to do so. So they threw them down on me, and closing the mouth of the pit with the stones aforesaid, went their ways. I looked about me, and found myself in a vast cave full of dead bodies that exhaled a fulsome and loathsome smell, and the air was heavy with the groans of the dying. Thereupon I fell to blaming myself for what I had done, saying, "By Allah, I deserve all that hath befallen me, and all that shall befall me. What curse was upon me to take a wife in this city? There is no majesty, and there is no might save in Allah, the glorious, the great. As often as I say I have escaped from one calamity, I fall into a worse. By Allah, this is an abominable death to die. Would heaven I had died a decent death, and been washed and shrouded like a man and a Muslim. Would I had been drowned at sea or perished in the mountains, it were better than to die this miserable death." And on such wise I kept blaming my own folly and greed of gain in that black hole, knowing not night from day, and I ceased not to ban the foul fiend, and to bless the Almighty Friend. Then I threw myself down on the bones of the dead, and lay there, imploring Allah's help, and in the violence of my despair, invoking death, which came not to me, till the fire of hunger burned my stomach, and thirst set my throat aflame, and I sat up, and feeling for the bread, ate a morsel, and upon it swallowed a mouthful of water. After this, the worst night I ever knew. I arose, and exploring the cavern, found that it extended a long way with hollows in its sides, and its floor was strewn with dead bodies and rotten bones that had lain there from olden time. So I made myself a place in a cavity of the cavern, afar from the corpses lately thrown down, and there slept. I abode thus a long while, till my provision was like to give out. And yet I ate not save once every day or second day, nor did I drink more than an occasional draught, for fear my victual should fail me before my death. And I said to myself, Eat little and drink little, belike the Lord shall vouchsafe deliverance to thee. One day, as I sat thus, pondering my case and bethinking me how I should do when my bread and water should be exhausted, behold, the stone that covered the opening was suddenly rolled away, and the light streamed down upon me. Quoth I wonder what is the matter. Haply they have brought another corpse. Then I espied folk standing about the mouth of the pit, who presently let down a dead man and a live woman, weeping and bemoaning herself, and with her an ampler supply of bread and water than usual. I saw her, and she was a beautiful woman, but she saw me not. And they closed up the opening and went away. Then I took the leg bone of a dead man, and going up to the woman, smote her on the crown of the head. And she cried one cry, and fell down in a swoon. I smote her a second and a third time, till she was dead, when I laid hands on her bread and water, and found on her great plenty of ornaments, and rich apparel, necklaces, jewels, and gold trinkets. For it was their custom to bury women in all their finery. I carried the vivers to my sleeping place in the cavern side, and ate and drank of them sparingly, no more than sufficed to keep the life in me, lest the provisions come speedily to an end, and I perish of hunger and thirst. Yet did I never wholly lose hope in Almighty Allah. I abode thus a great while, killing all the live folk they let down into the cavern, and taking their provisions of meat and drink. Till one day, as I slept, I was awakened by something scratching and burrowing among the bodies in a corner of the cave, and said, What can this be? Fearing wolves or hyenas. So I sprang up, and seizing the leg bone aforesaid, made for the noise. As soon as the thing was ware of me, it fled from me into the inward of the cavern, and lo, it was a wild beast. However, I followed it to the further end, till I saw, afar off, a point of light, not bigger than a star, now appearing and then disappearing. So I made for it, and as I drew near, it grew larger and brighter, till I was certified that it was a crevice in the rock, leading to the open country. And I said to myself, There must be some reason for this opening. Either it is the mouth of a second pit, such as that by which they let me down, or else it is a natural fissure in the stonery. So I bethought me a while, and nearing the light, found that it came from a breach in the backside of the mountain, which the wild beasts had enlarged by burrowing, that they might enter and devour the dead, and freely go to and fro. When I saw this, my spirits revived, and hope came back to me, and I made sure of life, after having died a death. So I went on as in a dream, and making shift to scramble through the breach, found myself on the slope of a high mountain, overlooking the salt sea, and cutting off all access thereto from the island, so that none could come at that part of the beach from the city. I praised my Lord and thanked him, rejoicing greatly and heartening myself with the prospect of deliverance. Then I returned through the crack to the cavern, and brought out all the food and water I had saved up, and donned some of the dead folks' clothes over my own. After which I gathered together all the collars and necklaces of pearls and jewels, and trinkets of gold and silver set with precious stones, and other ornaments and valuables I could find upon the corpses. And making them into bundles with the grave clothes and raiment of the dead, carried them out to the back of the mountain, facing the seashore, where I established myself, purposing to wait there till it should please Almighty Allah to send me relief by means of some passing ship. I visited the cavern daily, and as often as I found folk buried alive there, I killed them all indifferently, men and women, and took their victual and valuables, and transported them to my seat on the seashore. And after carrying all my victuals and valuables from the cavern to the coast, I abode a long while by the sea, pondering my case, till one day I caught sight of a ship passing in the midst of the clashing sea, swollen with dashing billows. So I took a piece of a white shroud I had with me, and tying it to a staff, ran along the seashore, making signals therewith, and calling to the people in the ship, till they espied me, and hearing my shouts, sent a boat to fetch me off. When it drew near, the crew called out to me, saying, Who art thou, and how camest thou to be on this mountain, whereon never saw we any in our born days? I answered, I am a gentleman and a merchant who hath been wrecked, and saved myself on one of the planks of the ship, with some of my goods, and by the blessing of the Almighty, and the decrees of destiny, and my own strength and skill, after much toil and moil, I have landed with my gear in this place, where I waited some passing ship to take me off. So they took me in their boat, together with the bundles I had made of the jewels and valuables from the cavern, tied up in clothes and shrouds, and rowed back with me to the ship, where the captain said to me, How camest thou, O man, to yonder place on yonder mountain, behind which lieth a great city? All my life I have sailed these seas, and passed to and fro hard by these heights, yet never saw I here any living thing save wild beasts and birds. I repeated to him the story I had told the sailors, but acquainted him with nothing of that which had befallen me in the city and the cavern, lest there should be any of the islandry in the ship. Then I took out some of the best pearls I had with me, and offered them to the captain, saying, O my lord, thou hast been the means of saving me off this mountain. I have no ready money, but take this from me in requital of thy kindness and good offices. But he refused to accept it of me, saying, When we find a shipwrecked man on the seashore or on an island, we take him up and give him meat and drink, and if he be naked, we clothe him. Nor take we aught from him. Nay, when we reach a port of safety, we set him ashore with a present of our own money, and entreat him kindly and charitably, for the love of Allah the Most High. So I prayed that his life be long in the land, and rejoiced in my escape, trusting to be delivered from my stress, and to forget my past mishaps. For every time I remembered being let down into the cave with my dead wife, I shuddered in horror. Then we pursued our voyage, and sailed from island to island and sea to sea, till we arrived at the island of the Bell, which containeth a city 2 days' journey in extent, whence, after a 6 days' run, we reached the island Kala, hard by the land of Hind. At last, by the decree of Allah, we arrived in safety at Basra town, where I tarried a few days, then went on to Baghdad city, and finding my quarter, entered my house with lively pleasure. There I foregathered with my family and friends, who rejoiced in my happy return, and gave me joy of my safety. I laid up in my storehouses all the goods I had brought with me, and gave alms and largesse to fakirs and beggars, and clothed the widow and the orphan. Then I gave myself up to pleasure and enjoyment, returning to my old merry mode of life. Such, then, be the most marvellous adventures of my 4th voyage. But tomorrow, if you will kindly come to me, I will tell you that which befell me in my 5th voyage, which was yet rarer and more marvellous than those which forewent it. The 5th voyage of Sindbad the Seaman. Know, O my brothers, that when I had been a while on shore after my 4th voyage, and when in my comfort and pleasures and merrymakings, and in my rejoicing over my large gains and profits, I had forgotten all I had endured of perils and sufferings, the carnal man was again seized with a longing to travel and to see foreign countries and islands. Accordingly, I bought costly merchandise suited to my purpose, and making it up into bales, repaired to Basra, where I walked about the river quay till I found a fine tall ship, newly builded with gear unused and fitted ready for sea. She pleased me, so I bought her, and embarking my goods in her, hired a master and crew, over whom I set certain of my slaves and servants as inspectors. A number of merchants also brought their outfits, and paid me freight and passage money. And then, after reciting the Fatiha, we set sail over Allah's pool in all joy and cheer, promising ourselves a prosperous voyage and much profit. We sailed from city to city, and from island to island, and from sea to sea, viewing the cities and countries by which we passed, and selling and buying in not a few, till one day we came to a great uninhabited island, deserted and desolate, whereon was a white dome of biggest bulk, half buried in the sands. The merchants landed to examine this dome, leaving me in the ship. And when they drew near, behold, it was a huge roc's egg. They fell a-beating it with stones, knowing not what it was, and presently broke it open, whereupon much water ran out of it, and the young roc appeared within. So they pulled it forth of the shell, and cut its throat, and took of it great store of meat. Now I was in the ship, and knew not what they did. But presently one of the passengers came up to me and said, "O my lord, come and look at the egg, that we thought to be a dome." So I looked, and seeing the merchants beating it with stones, called out to them, "Stop! Stop! Do not meddle with that egg, or the bird roc will come out and break our ship and destroy us." But they paid no heed to me, and gave not over smiting upon the egg, when behold, the day grew dark and dun, and the sun was hidden from us, as if some great cloud had passed over the firmament. So we raised our eyes, and saw that what we took for a cloud was a roc poised between us and the sun, and it was his wings that darkened the day. When he came and saw his egg broken, he cried a loud cry, whereupon his mate came flying up, and they both began circling about the ship, crying out at us with voices louder than thunder. I called to the master and crew, "Put out to sea and seek safety in flight, before we be all destroyed." So the merchants came on board, and we cast off and made haste from the island to gain the open sea. When the rocs saw this, they flew off, and we crowded all sail on the ship, thinking to get out of their country. But presently the two reappeared, and flew after us, and stood over us, each carrying in its claws a huge boulder which it had brought from the mountains. As soon as the he-roc came up with us, he let fall upon us the roc he held in his pounces. But the master put about ship, so that the roc missed her by some small matter, and plunged into the waves with such violence that the ship pitched high, and then sank into the trough of the sea, and the bottom of the ocean appeared to us. Then the she-roc let fall her roc, which was bigger than that of her mate, and as destiny had decreed, it fell on the poop of the ship, and crushed it, the rudder flying into 20 pieces. Whereupon the vessel foundered, and all and everything on board were cast into the main. As for me, I struggled for sweet life, till Almighty Allah threw in my way one of the planks of the ship, to which I clung, and bestriding it, fell a-paddling with my feet. Now the ship had gone down hard by an island in the midst of the main, and the winds and waves bore me on, till, by permission of the Most High, they cast me up on the shore of an island, at the last gasp for toil and distress, and half dead with hunger and thirst. So I landed more like a corpse than a live man, and throwing myself down on the beach, lay there a while, till I began to revive and recover spirits. Then I walked about the island, and found it as it were one of the garths and gardens of paradise. Its trees, in abundance dight, bore ripe yellow fruit for freight. Its streams ran clear and bright. Its flowers were fair to scent and to sight, and its birds warbled with delight the praises of him to whom belong permanence and all might. So I ate my fill of the fruits, and slaked my thirst with the water of the streams, till I could no more, and I returned thanks to the Most High, and glorified him. After which I sat till nightfall, hearing no voice, and seeing none inhabitant. Then I lay down, well nigh dead for travail and trouble and terror, and slept without surcease till morning, when I arose and walked about under the trees, till I came to the channel of a draw-well fed by a spring of running water, by which well sat an old man of venerable aspect, girt about with a waistcloth made of the fibre of palm fronds. Quoth I to myself, haply this sheikh is of those who were wrecked in the ship, and hath made his way to this island. So I drew near to him and saluted him, and he returned my salam by signs, but spoke not. And I said to him, O nuncle mine, what causeth thee to sit here? He shook his head, and moaned and signed to me with his hand, as who would say, Take me on thy shoulders, and carry me to the other side of the well channel. And quoth I in my mind, I will deal kindly with him, and do what he desireth. It may be I shall win me a reward in heaven, for he may be a paralytic. So I took him on my back, and carrying him to the place whereat he pointed, said to him, Dismount at thy leisure. But he would not get off my back, and wound his legs about my neck. I looked at them, and seeing that they were like a buffalo's hide for blackness and roughness, was affrighted, and would have cast him off. But he clung to me, and gripped my neck with his legs, till I was well nigh choked. The world grew black in my sight, and I fell senseless to the ground like one dead. But he still kept his seat, and raising his legs, drummed with his heels, and beat harder than palm rods my back and shoulders, till he forced me to rise for excess of pain. Then he signed to me with his hand to carry him hither and thither among the trees which bore the best fruits. And if ever I refused to do his bidding, or loitered, or took my leisure, he beat me with his feet more grievously than if I had been beaten with whips. He ceased not to signal with his hand wherever he was minded to go. So I carried him about the island like a captive slave, and he bepissed and conskited my shoulders and back, dismounting not night nor day. And when as he wished to sleep, he wound his legs about my neck and leaned back and slept a while, then arose and beat me, whereupon I sprang up in haste, unable to gainsay him because of the pain he inflicted on me. And indeed I blamed myself and sore repented me of having taken compassion on him, and continued in this condition, suffering fatigue not to be described, till I said to myself, I wrought him a weal, and he requited me with my ill. By Allah, never more will I do any man a service so long as I live. And again I besought the Most High that I might die for stress of weariness and misery. And thus I abode for a long while, till one day I came with him to a place wherein was abundance of gourds, many of them dry. So I took a great dry gourd, and cutting open the head, scooped out the inside and cleaned it. After which I gathered grapes from a vine which grew hard by, and squeezed them into the gourd, till it was full of the juice. Then I stopped up the mouth, and set it in the sun, where I left it for some days, until it became strong wine. And every day I used to drink of it, to comfort and sustain me under my fatigues with that froward and obstinate fiend. And as often as I drank myself drunk, I forgot my troubles, and took new heart. One day he saw me drinking, and signed to me with his hand, as who would say, What is that? Quoth I, It is an excellent cordial, which cheereth the heart and reviveth the spirits. Then, being heated with wine, I ran and danced with him among the trees, clapping my hands and singing and making merry, and I staggered under him by design. When he saw this, he signed to me to give him the gourd that he might drink, and I feared him and gave it him. So he took it, and draining it to the dregs, cast it on the ground, whereupon he grew frolicsome and began to clap hands and jig to and fro on my shoulders, and he made water upon me so copiously that all my dress was drenched. Presently the fumes of the wine rising to his head, he became helplessly drunk, and his side muscles and limbs relaxed, and he swayed to and fro on my back. When I saw that he had lost his senses for drunkenness, I put my hand to his legs, and, loosing them from my neck, stooped down well nigh to the ground, and threw him at full length. Then I took up a great stone from among the trees, and coming up to him, smote him therewith on the head with all my might, and crushed in his skull, as he lay dead drunk. Thereupon his flesh and fat and blood being in a pulp, he died and went to his deserts, the fire. No mercy of Allah be upon him. I then returned, with a heart at ease, to my former station on the seashore, and abode in that island many days, eating of its fruits and drinking of its waters, and keeping a lookout for passing ships. Till one day, as I sat on the beach, recalling all that had befallen me, and saying, I wonder if Allah will save me alive and restore me to my home and family and friends. Behold, a ship was making for the island through the dashing sea and clashing waves. Presently it cast anchor, and the passengers landed. So I made for them, and when they saw me, all hastened up to me, and gathering round me, questioned me of my case, and how I came hither. I told them all that had betided me, whereat they marvelled with exceeding marvel, and said, He who rode on my shoulder is called the Sheikh al-Bahr, or Old Man of the Sea, and none ever felt his legs or neck, and came off alive but thou. And those who die under him he eateth. So praised be Allah for thy safety. Then they set somewhat of food before me, whereof I ate my fill, and gave me somewhat of clothes, wherewith I clad myself anew and covered my nakedness. After which they took me up into the ship, and we sailed days and nights, till fate brought us to a place called the City of Apes, builded with lofty houses, all of which gave upon the sea, and it had a single gate, studded and strengthened with iron nails. Now every night, as soon as it is dusk, the dwellers in the city used to come forth of the gates, and putting out to sea in boats and ships, pass the night upon the waters, in their fear lest the apes should come down on them from the mountains. Hearing this, I was sore troubled, remembering what I had before suffered from the ape kind. Presently I landed to solace myself in the city, but meanwhile the ship set sail without me, and I repented of having gone ashore, and calling to my mind my companions and what had befallen me with the apes, first and after, sat down and fell a-weeping and lamenting. Presently one of the townsfolk accosted me and said to me, "O my lord, beseemeth thou art a stranger to these parts." "Yes," answered I am indeed a stranger, and a poor one, who came hither in a ship which cast anchor here, and I landed to visit the town. But when I would have gone on board again, I found they had sailed without me. Quoth he, "Come and embark with us, for if thou lie the night in the city, the apes will destroy thee." "Hearkening and obedience," replied I, and rising, straightway embarked with him in one of the boats, whereupon they pushed off from shore, and anchoring a mile or so from the land, there passed the night. At daybreak they rowed back to the city, and landing, went each about his business. Thus they did every night, for if any tarried in the town by night, the apes came down on him and slew him. As soon as it was day, the apes left the place and ate of the fruits of the gardens, then went back to the mountains and slept there till nightfall, when they again came down upon the city. Now this place was in the farthest part of the country of the blacks, and one of the strangest things that befell me during my sojourn in the city was on this wise. One of the company with whom I passed the night in the boat asked me, "O my lord, thou art apparently a stranger in these parts. Hast thou any craft whereat thou canst work?" And I answered, "By Allah, O my brother, I have no trade, nor know I any handicraft, for I was a merchant and a man of money and substance, and had a ship of my own, laden with great store of goods and merchandise. But it foundered at sea, and all were drowned excepting me, who saved myself on a piece of plank which Allah vouchsafed to me of his favour." Upon this he brought me a cotton bag, and giving it to me said, "Take this bag, and fill it with pebbles from the beach, and go forth with a company of the townsfolk, to whom I will give a charge respecting thee. Do as they do, and belike thou shalt gain what may further thy return voyage to thy native land." Then he carried me to the beach, where I filled my bag with pebbles, large and small, and presently we saw a company of folk issue from the town, each bearing a bag like mine, filled with pebbles. To these he committed me, commending me to their care, and saying, "This man is a stranger, so take him with you and teach him how to gather, that he may get his daily bread, and you will earn your reward and recompense in heaven." "On our head and eyes be it," answered they, and bidding me welcome, fared on with me till we came to a spacious wadi, full of lofty trees with trunks so smooth that none might climb them. Now sleeping under these trees were many apes, which when they saw us rose and fled from us, and swarmed up among the branches. Whereupon my companions began to pelt them with what they had in their bags, and the apes fell to plucking of the fruit of the trees, and casting them at the folk. I looked at the fruits they cast at us, and found them to be India or coconuts. So I chose out a great tree full of apes, and going up to it began to pelt them with stones, and they in return pelted me with nuts, which I collected as did the rest. So that even before I had made an end of my bagful of pebbles, I had gotten great plenty of nuts. And as soon as my companions had in like manner gotten as many nuts as they could carry, we returned to the city, where we arrived at the fag end of day. Then I went in to the kindly man who had brought me in company with the nut-gatherers, and gave him all I had gotten, thanking him for his kindness. But he would not accept them, saying, "Sell them and make profit by the price." And presently he added, giving me the key of a closet in his house, "Store thy nuts in this safe place, and go thou forth every morning, and gather them as thou hast done today, and choose out the worst for sale and supplying thyself, but lay up the rest here, so haply thou mayst collect enough to serve thee for thy return home." "Allah requite thee," answered I, and did as he advised me, going out daily with the coconut gatherers, who commended me to one another, and showed me the best stocked trees. Thus did I for some time, till I had laid up great store of excellent nuts, besides a large sum of money, the price of those I had sold. I became thus at my ease, and bought all I saw and had a mind to, and passed my time pleasantly, greatly enjoying my stay in the city, till, as I stood on the beach, one day a great ship steering through the heart of the sea presently cast anchor by the shore, and landed a company of merchants, who proceeded to sell and buy and barter their goods for coconuts and other commodities. Then I went to my friend and told him of the coming of the ship, and how I had a mind to return to my own country, and he said, "'Tis for thee to decide." So I thanked him for his bounties, and took leave of him. Then, going to the captain of the ship, I agreed with him for my passage, and embarked my coconuts and what else I possessed. We weighed anchor the same day, and sailed from island to island and sea to sea, and whenever we stopped, I sold and traded with my coconuts, and the Lord requited me more than I erst had and lost. Amongst other places, we came to an island abounding in cloves and cinnamon and pepper, and the country people told me that by the side of each pepper bunch groweth a great leaf, which shadeth it from the sun, and casteth the water off in the wet season. But when the rain ceaseth, the leaf turneth over, and droopeth down by the side of the bunch. Here I took in great store of pepper and cloves and cinnamon, in exchange for coconuts, and we passed thence to the island of Al-Usirat, whence cometh the comorin, aloes wood, and thence to another island, 5 days' journey in length, where grows the Chinese line aloes, which is better than the comorin. But the people of this island are fouler of condition and religion than those of the other, for they love fornication and wine-bibbing, and know not prayer, nor call to prayer. Thence we came to the pearl fisheries, and I gave the divers some of my coconuts, and said to them, "Dive for my luck and lot." They did so, and brought up from the deep bight great store of large and priceless pearls, and they said to me, "By Allah, O my master, thy luck is lucky." Then we sailed on with the blessing of Allah, whose name be exalted, and ceased not sailing till we arrived safely at Bassorah. There I abode a little, and then went on to Baghdad, where I entered my quarter, and found my house, and foregathered with my family, and saluted my friends, who gave me joy of my safe return, and I laid up all my goods and valuables in my storehouses. Then I distributed alms and largesse, and clothed the widow and the orphan, and made presents to my relations and comrades. For the Lord had requited me fourfold that I had lost. After which I returned to my old merry way of life, and forgot all I had suffered in the great profit and gain I had made. Such, then, is the history of my 5th voyage and its wonderments. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. In days of yore, there dwelt in a certain town of Persia 2 brothers, one named Qasim and the other Ali Baba, who, at their father's demise, had divided the little wealth he had left to them with equitable division, and had lost no time in wasting and spending it all. The elder, however, presently took to himself a wife, the daughter of an opulent merchant, so that when his father-in-law fared to the mercy of Almighty Allah, he became owner of a large shop, filled with rare goods and costly wares, and of a storehouse stocked with precious stuffs. likewise of much gold that was buried in the ground. Thus was he known throughout the city as a substantial man. But the woman whom Ali Baba had married was poor and needy. They lived, therefore, in a mean hovel, and Ali Baba eked out a scanty livelihood by the sale of fuel which he daily collected in the jungle and carried about the town to the bazaar upon his 3 asses. Now it chanced one day that Ali Baba had cut dead branches and dry fuel sufficient for his need, and had placed the load upon his beasts, when suddenly he espied a dust cloud spiring high in air to his right, and moving rapidly towards him. And when he closely considered it, he descried a troop of horsemen riding on amain and about to reach him. At this sight he was sore alarmed, and fearing lest perchance they were a band of bandits who would slay him and drive off his donkeys, in his affright he drove his animals laden with the fuel into a byway of the bushes, and swarmed up a thick trunk of a huge tree to hide himself therein. And he sat upon a branch whence he could descry everything beneath him, whilst none below could catch a glimpse of him above. And that tree grew close beside a rock which towered high above head. The horsemen came close up to the rock face, and all dismounted, whereat Ali Baba took good note of them, and soon he was fully persuaded that they were a troop of highwaymen, who, having fallen upon a caravan, had despoiled it and carried off the spoil, and brought their booty to this place with intent of concealing it safely in some cache. Moreover, he observed that they were 40 in number. Ali Baba saw the robbers, as soon as they came under the tree, each unbridle his horse and hobble it. Then all took off their saddlebags, which proved to be full of gold and silver. The man who seemed to be the captain presently pushed forwards, load on shoulder, through thorns and thickets, till he came up to a certain spot, where he uttered these strange words: "Open, O Sesame!" And forthwith appeared a wide doorway in the face of the rock. The robbers went in, and last of all their chief, and then the portal shut of itself. Long while they stayed within the cave, whilst Ali Baba was constrained to abide perched upon the tree, reflecting that if he came down, peradventure the band might issue forth that very moment and seize him and slay him. At last he had determined to mount one of the horses and drive on his asses to return townwards, when suddenly the portal flew open. The robber chief was first to issue forth. Then, standing at the entrance, he saw and counted his men as they came out, and lastly he spake the magical words, "Shut, O Sesame!" whereat the door closed of itself. When all had passed muster and review, each slung on his saddlebags and bridled his own horse, and as soon as ready they rode off in the direction whence they came. Ali Baba remained still perched on the tree and watched their departure, nor would he descend until what time they were clean gone out of sight, lest perchance one of them return and look around and descry him. Then he thought within himself, "I too will try the virtue of those magical words, and see if at my bidding the door will open and close." So he called out aloud, "Open, O Sesame!" And no sooner had he spoken than straightway the portal flew open, and he entered within. He saw a large cavern, and a vaulted, in height equalling the stature of a full-grown man, and it was hewn in the live stone, and lighted up with a light that came through air-holes and bull's-eyes in the upper surface of the rock which formed the roof. He had expected to find naught save outer gloom in this robber's den, and he was surprised to see the whole room filled with bales of all manner stuffs, and heaped up from sole to ceiling with camel-loads of silks and brocades, and embroidered cloths, and mounds on mounds of vari-coloured carpetings, besides which he espied coins, golden and silvern without measure or account, some piled upon the ground, and others bound in leathern bags and sacks. Seeing these goods and monies in such abundance, Ali Baba determined in his mind that, not during a few years only, but for many generations, thieves must have stored their gains and spoils in this place. When he stood within the cave, its door had closed upon him, yet he was not dismayed, since he had kept in memory the magical words. And he took no heed of the precious stuffs around him, but applied himself only and wholly to the sacks of gold coin. Of these he carried out as many as he judged sufficient burthen for the beasts. Then he loaded them upon his animals, and covered this plunder with sticks and fuel, so none might discern the bags, but might think that he was carrying home his usual ware. Lastly he called out, "Shut, O Sesame!" And forthwith the door closed, for the spell so wrought that whensoever any entered the cave, its portal shut of itself behind him, and as he issued therefrom, the same would neither open nor close again till he had pronounced the words, "Shut, O Sesame!" Presently, having laden his asses, Ali Baba urged them before him with all speed to the city, and reaching home, he drove them into the yard, and shutting close the outer door, took down first the sticks and fuel, and after the bags of gold which he carried in to his wife. She felt them, and finding them full of coin, suspected that Ali Baba had been robbing, and fell to berating and blaming him for that he should do so ill a thing. Quoth Ali Baba to his wife, "Indeed, I am no robber, and rather do thou rejoice with me at our good fortune." Hereupon he told her of his adventure, and began to pour the gold from the bags in heaps before her, and her sight was dazzled by the sheen, and her heart delighted at his recital and adventures. Then she began counting the gold, whereat quoth Ali Baba, "O silly woman, how long wilt thou continue turning over the coin? Now let me dig a hole wherein to hide this treasure, that none may know its secret." Quoth she, "Right is thy rede. Still would I weigh the monies, and have some inkling of their amount." And he replied, "As thou pleasest, but see thou tell no man." So she went off in haste to the elder brother Cassim's home, to borrow weights and scales wherewith she might balance the coins, and make some reckoning of their value. And when she could not find Cassim, she said to his wife, "Lend me, I pray thee, thy scales for a moment." Replied her sister-in-law, "Hast thou need of the bigger balance, or the smaller?" And the other rejoined, "I need not the large scales, give me the little." And her sister-in-law cried, "Stay here a moment, whilst I look about and find thy want." With this pretext, Cassim's wife went aside, and secretly smeared wax and suet over the pan of the balance, that she might know what thing it was Ali Baba's wife would weigh. For she made sure that whatso it be, some bit thereof would stick to the wax and fat. So the woman took the opportunity to satisfy her curiosity, and Ali Baba's wife, suspecting naught thereof, carried home the scales and began to weigh the gold, whilst Ali Baba ceased not digging. And when the money was weighed, they twain stowed it into the hole, which they carefully filled up with earth. Then the good wife took back the scales to her kinswoman, all unknowing that a coin had adhered to the cup of the scales. But when Cassim's wife espied the gold coin, she fumed with envy and wrath, saying to herself, "So ho, they borrowed my balance to weigh out coins." And she marvelled greatly when so poor a man as Ali Baba had gotten such store of wealth that he should be obliged to weigh it with a pair of scales. Now, after long pondering the matter, when her husband returned home at eventide, she said to him, "O man, thou deemest thyself a wight of wealth and substance, but lo, thy brother Ali Baba is an emir by the side of thee, and richer far than thou art. He hath such heaps of gold that he must needs weigh his monies with scales, whilst thou, forsooth, art satisfied to count thy coin." "Whence knowest thou this?" asked Cassim. And in answer his wife related all anent the pair of scales, and how she found a coin stuck to them, and showed him the gold coin, which bore the mark and superscription of some ancient king. No sleep had Cassim all that night by reason of his envy and jealousy. And next morning he rose betimes, and going to Ali Baba said, "O my brother, to all appearance thou art poor and needy, but in effect thou hast a store of wealth so abundant that perforce thou must weigh thy gold with scales." Quoth Ali Baba, "What is this thou sayest? I understand thee not. Make clear thy purport." And quoth Cassim with ready rage, "Feign not that thou art ignorant of what I say, and think not to deceive me." Then showing him the coin, he cried, "Thousands of gold coins such as these thou hast put by, and meanwhile my wife found this one stuck to the cup of the scales." Then Ali Baba understood how both Cassim and his wife knew that he had store of gold, and said in his mind that it would not avail him to keep the matter hidden, but would rather cause ill will and mischief. And thus he was induced to tell his brother every whit concerning the bandits, and also of the treasure trove in the cave. When he had heard the story, Cassim exclaimed, "I would fain learn of thee the certainty of the place where thou foundest the monies, also the magical words whereby the door opened and closed. And I forewarn thee, An thou tell me not the whole truth, I will give notice of those coins to the Wali. Then shalt thou forfeit all thy wealth, and be disgraced and thrown into jail. Thereupon Ali Baba told him his tale, not forgetting the magical words. And Qasim, who kept careful heed of all these matters, next day set out, driving 10 mules he had hired, and readily found the place which Ali Baba had described to him. And when he came to the aforesaid rock, and to the tree whereon Ali Baba had hidden himself, and he had made sure of the door, he cried in great joy, "Open, O Sesame!" The portal yawned wide at once, and Qasim went within and saw the piles of jewels and treasures lying ranged all round. And as soon as he stood amongst them, the door shut after him as wont to do. He walked about in ecstasy, marvelling at the treasures, and when weary of admiration, he gathered together bags of gold, a sufficient load for his 10 mules, and placed them by the entrance, in readiness to be carried outside and set upon the beasts. But by the will of Allah Almighty, he had clean forgotten the cabalistic words, and cried out, "Open, O barley!" Whereat the door refused to move. Astonished and confused beyond measure, he named the names of all manner of grains, save sesame, which had slipped from his memory as though he had never heard the word. Whereat in his dire distress he heeded not the coins that lay heaped at the entrance, and paced to and fro, backwards and forwards, within the cave, sorely puzzled and perplexed. The wealth whose sight had erewhile filled his heart with joy and gladness was now the cause of bitter grief and sadness. Qasim gave up all hope of the life which he by his greed and envy had so sore imperilled. It came to pass that at noontide the robbers, returning by that way, saw from afar some mules standing beside the entrance, and much they marvelled at what had brought the beasts to that place. For, inasmuch as Qasim by mischance had failed to tether or hobble them, they had strayed about the jungle and were browsing hither and thither. However, the thieves paid scant regard to the estrays, nor cared they to secure them, but only wondered by what means they had wandered so far from the town. Then, reaching the cave, the captain and his troop dismounted, and going up to the door, repeated the formula, and at once it flew open. Now Qasim had heard from within the cave the horse-hoofs drawing nigh and yet nigher, and he fell down to the ground in a fit of fear, never doubting that it was the clatter of the banditti who would slaughter him without fail. Howbeit he presently took heart of grace, and at the moment when the door flew open, he rushed out, hoping to make good his escape. But the unhappy ran full tilt against the captain, who stood in front of the band, and felled him to the ground. Whereupon a robber, standing near his chief, at once bared his brand, and with one cut clave Qasim clean in twain. Thereupon the robbers rushed into the cavern, and put back, as they were before, the bags of gold which Qasim had heaped up at the doorway, ready for taking away. Nor recked they aught of those which Ali Baba had removed. So dazed and amazed were they to discover by what means the strange man had effected an entrance. All knew that it was not possible for any to drop through the skylights, so tall and steep was the rock's face, withal slippery of ascent, and also that none could enter by the portal unless he knew the magical words whereby to open it. However, they presently quartered the dead body of Qasim, and hung it to the door within the cavern, 2 parts to the right jamb, and as many to the left, that the sight might be a warning of approaching doom for all who dared enter the cave. Then coming out, they closed the hall door, and rode away upon their wonted work. Now when night fell, and Qasim came not home, his wife waxed uneasy in mind, and running round to Ali Baba said, "O my brother, Qasim hath not returned. Thou knowest whither he went, and so I fear me some misfortune hath betided him." Ali Baba also divined that a mishap had happened to prevent his return. Not the less, however, he strove to comfort his sister-in-law with words of cheer, and said, "O wife of my brother, Qasim happily exerciseth discretion, and avoiding the city, cometh by a roundabout road, and will be here anon. This, I do believe, is the reason why he tarrieth." Thereupon, comforted in spirit, Qasim's wife fared homewards, and sat awaiting her husband's return. But when half the night was spent, and still he came not, she was as one distraught. She feared to cry aloud for her grief, lest haply the neighbours, hearing her, should come and learn the secret. So she wept in silence, and upbraiding herself, fell to thinking, wherefore did I disclose this secret to him, and beget envy and jealousy of Ali Baba? This be the fruit thereof, and hence the disaster that hath come down upon me. She spent the rest of the night in bitter tears, and early on the morrow hied in hottest hurry to Ali Baba, and prayed that he would go forth in quest of his brother. So he strove to console her, and straightway set out with his asses for the forest. Presently, reaching the rock, he wondered to see stains of blood freshly shed, and not finding his brother or the 10 mules, he forefelt a calamity from so evil a sign. He then went to the door, and saying, "Open, O sesame!" he pushed in and saw the dead body of Qasim, 2 parts hanging to the right, and the rest to the left of the entrance. Albeit he was affrighted beyond measure of affright, he wrapped the quarters in 2 cloths, and laid them upon one of his asses, hiding them carefully with sticks and fuel, that none might see them. Then he placed the bags of gold upon the 2 other animals, and likewise covered them most carefully. And when all was made ready, he closed the cave door with the magical words, and set him forth, wending homewards with all ward and watchfulness. The asses with the load of gold he made over to his wife, and bade her bury the bags with diligence. But he told her not the condition in which he had come upon his brother Qasim. Then he went with the other ass, to wit, the beast whereon was laid the corpse, to the widow's house, and knocked gently at the door. Now Qasim had a slave girl, shrewd and sharp-witted, called Morgiana. She as softly undid the bolt, and admitted Ali Baba and the ass into the courtyard of the house, when he let down the body from the beast's back, and said, "O Morgiana, haste thee, and make thee ready to perform the rites for the burial of thy lord. I now go to tell the tidings to thy mistress, and I will quickly return to help thee in this matter." At that instant, Qasim's widow, seeing her brother-in-law, exclaimed, "O Ali Baba, what news bringest thou of my spouse? Alas, I see grief tokens written upon thy countenance. Say quickly what hath happened." Then he recounted to her how it had fared with her husband, and how he had been slain by the robbers, and in what wise he had brought home the dead body. "O my lady, what was to happen hath happened, but it behoveth us to keep this matter secret, for that our lives depend upon privacy." She wept with sore weeping, and made answer, "It hath fared with my husband according to the fiat of fate. And now, for thy safety's sake, I give thee my word to keep the affair concealed." He replied, "Naught can avail when Allah hath decreed. Rest thee in patience until the days of thy widowhood be accomplished, after which time I will take thee to wife, and thou shalt live in comfort and happiness. And fear not lest my first spouse vex thee or show aught of jealousy, for that she is kindly and tender of heart." The widow, lamenting her loss noisily, cried, "Be it as ye now please." Then Ali Baba farewelled her, weeping and wailing for her husband, and joining Morgiana, took counsel with her how to manage the burial of his brother. So, after much consultation and many warnings, he left the slave girl and departed home, driving his ass before him. As soon as Ali Baba had fared forth, Morgiana went quickly to a druggist's shop, and that she might the better dissemble with him, and not make known the matter, she asked of him a drug often administered to men when diseased with dangerous distemper. He gave it, saying, "Who is there in thy house that lieth so ill as to require this medicine?" And said she, "My master Qasim is sick well nigh unto death. For many days he hath not spoken, nor tasted aught of food, so that almost we despair of his life." Next day Morgiana went again, and asked the druggist for more of medicine and essences, such as are adhibited to the sick when at door of death, that the moribund may haply rally before the last breath. The man gave the potion, and she, taking it, sighed aloud and wept, saying, "I fear me he may not have strength to drink this draught. Methinks all will be over with him ere I return to the house." Meanwhile, Ali Baba was anxiously awaiting to hear sounds of wailing and lamentation in Qasim's home, that he might, at such signal, hasten thither and take part in the ceremonies of the funeral. Early on the second day, Morgiana went with veiled face to one Baba Mustafa, a tailor well shotten in years, whose craft was to make shrouds and cerecloths. And as soon as she saw him open his shop, she gave him a gold piece, and said, "Do thou bind a bandage over thine eyes, and come along with me." Mustapha made as though he would not go, whereat Morgiana placed a second gold coin in his palm, and entreated him to accompany her. The tailor presently consented for greed of gain. So, tying a kerchief tightly over his eyes, she led him by the hand to the house wherein lay the dead body of her master. Then, taking off the bandage in the darkened room, she bade him sew together the quarters of the corpse, limb to its limb, and casting a cloth upon the body, said to the tailor, "Make haste, and sew a shroud according to the size of this dead man, and I will give thee, therefore, yet another ducat." Baba Mustapha quickly made the cerecloth of fitting length and breadth, and Morgiana paid him the promised gold. Then once more bandaging his eyes, led him back to the place whence she had brought him. After this she returned hurriedly home, and with the help of Ali Baba washed the body in warm water, and donning the shroud, lay the corpse upon a clean place, ready for burial. This done, Morgiana went to the mosque and gave notice to an imam that a funeral was awaiting the mourners in a certain household, and prayed that he would come to read the prayers for the dead. And the imam went back with her. Then 4 neighbours took up the bier, and bore it on their shoulders, and fared forth with the imam, and others who were wont to give assistance at such obsequies. After the funeral prayers were ended, 4 other men carried off the coffin, and Morgiana walked before it, bare of head, striking her breast, and weeping and wailing with exceeding loud lament, whilst Ali Baba and the neighbours came behind. In such order they entered the cemetery and buried him. Then, leaving him to Munkar and Nakir, the questioners of the dead, all wended their ways. Presently the women of the quarter, according to the custom of the city, gathered together in the house of mourning, and sat an hour with Qasim's widow, comforting and condoling, presently leaving her somewhat resigned and cheered. Ali Baba stayed 40 days at home in ceremonial lamentation for the loss of his brother. So none within the town, save himself and his wife, Qasim's widow, and Morgiana, knew aught about the secret. And when the 40 days of mourning were ended, Ali Baba removed to his own quarters all the property belonging to the deceased, and openly married the widow. Then he appointed his nephew, his brother's eldest son, who had lived a long time with a wealthy merchant, and was perfect of knowledge in all matters of trade, such as selling and buying, to take charge of the defunct's shop, and to carry on the business. It so chanced one day, when the robbers, as was their wont, came to the treasure cave, that they marvelled exceedingly to find nor sign nor trace of Qasim's body, whilst they observed that much of gold had been carried off. Quoth the captain, "Now it behoveth us to make inquiry in this matter, else shall we suffer much of loss, and this our treasure, which we and our forefathers have amassed during the course of many years, will little by little be wasted and spoiled." Hereto all assented, and with single mind agreed that he whom they had slain had knowledge of the magical words whereby the door was made to open. Moreover, that someone beside him had cognizance of the spell, and had carried off the body, and also much of gold. Wherefore they needs must make diligent research, and find out who the man ever might be. They then took counsel, and determined that one amongst them, who should be sagacious and deft of wit, must don the dress of some merchant from foreign parts. Then, repairing to the city, he must go about from quarter to quarter and from street to street, and learn if any townsman had lately died, and if so, where he wont to dwell, that with this clue they might be enabled to find the wight they sought. Hereat said one of the robbers, "Grant me leave that I fare, and find out such tidings in the town, and bring thee word anon. And if I fail of my purpose, I hold my life in forfeit." Accordingly, that bandit, after disguising himself by dress, pushed at night into the town, and next morning, early, he repaired to the market square, and saw that none of the shops had yet been opened, save only that of Baba Mustapha the tailor, who, thread and needle in hand, sat upon his working stool. The thief bade him good day, and said, "'Tis yet dark. How canst thou see to sew?" Said the tailor, "I perceive thou art a stranger. Despite my years, my eyesight is so keen that only yesterday I sewed together a dead body while sitting in a room quite darkened." Quoth the bandit thereupon to himself, "I shall get somewhat of my want from this snip." And to secure a further clue, he asked, "Meseemeth thou wouldst jest with me, and thou meanest that a cerecloth for a corpse was stitched by thee, and that thy business is to sew shrouds?" Answered the tailor, "It mattereth not to thee. Question me no more questions." Thereupon the robber placed a gold coin in his hand and continued, "I desire not to discover aught thou hidest, albeit my breast, like every honest man's, is the grave of secrets. And this only would I learn of thee. In what house didst thou do that job? Canst thou direct me thither, or thyself conduct me thereto?" The tailor took the gold with greed and cried, "I have not seen with mine own eyes the way to that house. A certain bondswoman led me to a place which I know right well, and there she bandaged my eyes and guided me to some tenement, and lastly carried me into a darkened room where lay the dead body dismembered. Then she unbound the kerchief and bade me sew together first the corpse and then the shroud, which having done, she again blindfolded me and led me back to the stead whence she had brought me, and left me there. Thou sayest then I am not able to tell thee where thou shalt find the house." Quoth the robber, "Albeit thou knowest not the dwelling whereof thou speakest, still canst thou take me to the place where thou wast blindfolded. Then I will bind a kerchief over thine eyes, and lead thee as thou wast led. On this wise, perchance, thou mayest hit upon the site. And thou wilt do this favour for me. See here, another golden ducat is thine." Thereupon the bandit slipped a second coin into the tailor's palm, and Baba Mustapha thrust it with the first into his pocket. Then, leaving his shop as it was, he walked to the place where Morgiana had tied the kerchief round his eyes, and with him went the robber, who, after binding on the bandage, led him by the hand. Baba Mustapha, who was clever and keen-witted, presently striking the street whereby he had fared with the handmaid, walked on, counting step by step. Then, halting suddenly, he said, "Thus far I came with her." And the twain stopped in front of Kasim's house, wherein now dwelt his brother Ali Baba. The robber then made marks with white chalk upon the door, to the end that he might readily find it at some future time, and removing the bandage from the tailor's eye, said, "O Baba Mustapha, I thank thee for this favour, and Almighty Allah guerdon thee for thy goodness. Tell me now, I pray thee, who dwelleth in yonder house?" Quoth he, "In very sooth I wot not, for I have little knowledge concerning this quarter of the city." And the bandit, understanding that he could find no further clue from the tailor, dismissed him to his shop with abundant thanks, and hastened back to the tryst place in the jungle, where the band awaited his coming. Not long after, it so fortuned that Morgiana, going out upon some errand, marvelled exceedingly at seeing the chalk marks showing white in the door. She stood a while deep in thought, and presently divined that some enemy had made the signs that he might recognize the house and play some slight upon her lord. She therefore chalked the doors of all her neighbours in like manner, and kept the matter secret, never entrusting it or to master or to mistress. Meanwhile the robber told his comrades his tale of adventure, and how he had found the clue. So the captain, and with him all the band, went one after other by different ways till they entered the city. And he who had placed the mark on Ali Baba's door accompanied the chief to point out the place. He conducted him straightway to the house, and showing the sign, exclaimed, "Here dwelleth he of whom we are in search." But when the captain looked around him, he saw that all the dwellings bore chalk marks after like fashion, and he wondered, saying, "By what manner of means knowest thou which house of all these houses that bear similar signs is that whereof thou spakest?" Hereat the robber guide was confounded beyond measure of confusion, and could make no answer. Then with an oath he cried, "I did assuredly set a sign upon a door, but I know not whence came all the marks upon the other entrances. nor can I say for a surety which it was I choked." Thereupon the captain returned to the marketplace and said to his men, "We have toiled and laboured in vain, nor have we found the house we went forth to seek. Return we now to the forest, our rendezvous. I also will fare thither." Then all trooped off and assembled together within the treasure cave. And when the robbers had all met, the captain judged him worthy of punishment who had spoken falsely and had led them through the city to no purpose. So he imprisoned him in presence of them all. And then said he, "To him amongst you will I show special favour, who shall go to town and bring me intelligence whereby we may lay hands upon the plunderer of our property." Hereat another of the company came forward and said, "I am ready to go and inquire into the case, and 'tis I who will bring thee to thy wish." The captain, after giving him presents and promises, dispatched him upon his errand. And by the decree of destiny, which none may gainsay, this second robber went first to the house of Baba Mustapha the tailor, as had done the thief who had foregone him. In like manner he also persuaded the snip with gifts of golden coin, that he be led hoodwinked, and thus too he was guided to Ali Baba's door. Here, noting the work of his predecessor, he affixed to the jamb a mark with red chalk, the better to distinguish it from the others whereon still showed the white. Then hied he back in stealth to his company. But Morgiana, on her part, also descried the red sign on the entrance, and with subtle forethought marked all the others after the same fashion, nor told she any what she had done. Meanwhile the bandit rejoined his band, and vauntingly said, "O our captain, I have found the house, and thereon put a mark whereby I shall distinguish it clearly from all its neighbours." The captain dispatched another of his men to the city, and he found the place. But, as aforetime, when the troop repaired thither, they saw each and every house marked with signs of red chalk. So they returned disappointed, and the captain, waxing displeased exceedingly and distraught, clapped also this spy into jail. Then said the chief to himself, "Two men have failed in their endeavour, and have met their rightful meed of punishment. And I trow that none other of my band will essay to follow up their research. So I myself will go and find the house of this wight." Accordingly he fared along, and aided by the tailor Baba Mustapha, who had gained much gain of golden pieces in this matter, he hit upon the house of Ali Baba. And here he made no outward show or sign, but marked it on the tablet of his heart, and impressed the picture upon the page of his memory. Then, returning to the jungle, he said to his men, "I have full cognizance of the place, and have limned it clearly in my mind, so now there will be no difficulty in finding it. Go forth straightways, buy me, and bring hither 19 mules, together with 1 large leathern jar of mustard oil, and 37 vessels of the same kind, clean empty. Without me and the 2 locked up in jail, ye number 37 souls. So I will stow you away armed and accoutred, each within his jar, and will load 2 upon each mule. And upon the 19th mule there shall be a man in an empty jar on one side, and on the other the jar full of oil. I, for my part, in guise of an oil merchant, will drive the mules into the town, arriving at the house by night, and will ask permission of its master to tarry there until morning. After this we shall seek occasion during the dark hours to rise up and fall upon him and slay him." Furthermore the captain spake, saying, "When we have made an end of him, we shall recover the gold and treasure whereof he robbed us, and bring it back upon the mules." This counsel pleased the robbers, who went forthwith and purchased mules and huge leathern jars, and did as the captain had bidden them. And after a delay of 3 days, shortly before nightfall they arose, and oversmearing all the jars with oil of mustard, each hid him inside an empty vessel. The chief then disguised himself in trader's gear, and placed the jars upon the 19 mules, to wit, the 37 vessels, in each of which lay a robber armed and accoutred, and the one that was full of oil. This done, he drove the beasts before him, and presently he reached Ali Baba's place at nightfall, when it chanced that the housemaster was strolling after supper to and fro in front of his home. The captain saluted him with a salam, and said, I come from such and such a village with oil, and oft times have I been here selling oil, but now, to my grief, I have arrived too late, and I am sore troubled and perplexed as to where I shall spend the night. And thou have pity on me, I pray thee, grant that I tarry here in thy courtyard, and ease the mules by taking down the jars and giving the beasts somewhat of fodder. Albeit Ali Baba had heard the captain's voice when perched upon the tree, and had seen him enter the cave, yet by reason of the disguise he knew him not for the leader of the thieves, and granted his request with hearty welcome, and gave him full license to halt there for the night. He then pointed out an empty shed wherein to tether the mules, and bade one of the slave boys go fetch grain and water. He also gave orders to the slave girl Morgiana, saying, A guest hath come hither, and tarrieth here tonight. Do thou busy thyself with all speed about his supper, and make ready the guest bed for him. Presently, when the captain had let down all the jars, and had fed and watered his mules, Ali Baba received him with all courtesy and kindness, and summoning Morgiana, said in his presence, See thou fail not in service of this our stranger, nor suffer him to lack for aught. Tomorrow early I would fare to the hammam and bathe. So do thou give my slave boy Abdullah a suit of clean white clothes, which I may put on after washing. Moreover, make thee ready a somewhat of broth overnight, that I may drink it after my return home. Replied she, I will have all in readiness, as thou hast bidden. So Ali Baba retired to his rest, and the captain, having supped, repaired to the shed, and saw that all the mules had their food and drink for the night. The captain, after seeing to the mules and the jars which Ali Baba and his household held to be full of oil, finding utter privacy, whispered to his men who were in ambush, This night at midnight, when ye hear my voice, do you quickly open with your sharp knives the leathern jars from top to bottom, and issue forth without delay. Then passing through the kitchen, he reached the chamber wherein a bed had been spread for him, Morgiana showing the way with a lamp. Quoth she, If thou need aught beside, I pray thee command this thy slave, who is ever ready to obey thy say. He made answer, Naught else need I. Then, putting out the light, he lay him down on the bed to sleep a while, ere the time came to rouse his men and finish off the work. Meanwhile, Morgiana did as her master had bidden her. She first took out a suit of clean white clothes and made it over to Abdullah, who had not yet gone to rest. Then she placed the pipkin upon the hearth to boil the broth, and blew the fire till it burnt briskly. After a short delay, she needs must see if the broth be boiling. But by that time all the lamps had gone out, and she found that the oil was spent, and that nowhere could she get a light. The slave boy Abdullah observed that she was troubled and perplexed hereat, and quoth he to her, Why make so much ado? In yonder shed are many jars of oil. Go now and take as much soever as thou listest. Morgiana gave thanks to him for his suggestion, and Abdullah, who was lying at his ease in the hall, went off to sleep, so that he might wake betimes and serve Ali Baba in the bath. So the handmaiden rose, and with oil-can in hand, walked to the shed where stood the leathern jars all ranged in rows. Now, as she drew nigh unto one of the vessels, the thief who was hidden therein, hearing the tread of footsteps, bethought him that it was of his captain, whose summons he awaited. So he whispered, Is it now time for us to sally forth? Morgiana started back affrighted at the sound of human accents. But inasmuch as she was bold and ready of wit, she replied, The time is not yet come, and said to herself, These jars are not full of oil, and herein I perceive a manner of mystery. Haply the oil merchant hatcheth some treacherous plot against my lord. Wherefore she answered in a voice made like to the captain's, Not yet, the time is not come. Then she went to the next jar, and returned the same reply to him who was within, and so on to all the vessels one by one. Then said she in herself, Praise to the Lord! My master took this fellow in, believing him to be an oil merchant, but lo, he hath admitted a band of robbers, who only await the signal to fall upon him, and plunder the place, and do him die. Then passed she on to the furthest jar, and finding it brimming with oil, filled her can, and returning to the kitchen, trimmed the lamp and lit the wicks. Then, bringing forth a large cauldron, she set it upon the fire, and filling it with oil from out the jar, heaped wood upon the hearth, and fanned it to a fierce flame, the readier to boil its contents. When this was done, she baled it out in potfuls, and poured it seething hot into the leathern vessels one by one, while the thieves, unable to escape, were scalded to death, and every jar contained a corpse. Thus did this slave girl, by her subtle wit, make a clean end of all noiselessly, and unknown even to the dwellers in the house. Now when she had satisfied herself that each and every of the men had been slain, she went back to the kitchen, and shutting to the door, sat brewing Ali Baba's broth. Scarce had an hour passed before the captain woke from sleep, and opening wide his window, saw that all was dark and silent. So he clapped his hands as a signal for his men to come forth, but not a sound was heard in return. After a while he clapped again, and called aloud, but got no answer. And when he cried out a third time without reply, he was perplexed, and went out to the shed wherein stood the jars. He thought to himself, perchance all have fallen asleep, whenas the time for action is now at hand. So I must e'en awaken them without stay or delay. Then, approaching the nearest jar, he was startled by a smell of oil and seething flesh, and touching it outside, he felt it reeking hot. Then going to the others one by one, he found all in like condition. Hereat he knew for a surety the fate which had betided his band, and fearing for his own safety, he clomb onto the wall, and thence dropping into a garden, made his escape in high dudgeon and sore disappointment. Morgiana awaited a while to see the captain return from the shed, but he came not, whereat she knew that he had scaled the wall and had taken to flight, for that the street door was double locked. And the thieves, being all disposed of on this wise, Morgiana laid her down to sleep in perfect solace and ease of mind. When 2 hours of darkness yet remained, Ali Baba awoke and went to the hammam, knowing naught of the night adventure, for the gallant slave girl had not aroused him, nor indeed had she deemed such action expedient, because had she sought an opportunity of reporting to him her plan, she might haply have lost her chance and spoiled the project. The sun was high over the horizon when Ali Baba walked back from the baths, and he marvelled exceedingly to see the jar still standing under the shed, and said, How cometh it that he, the oil merchant, my guest, hath not carried to the market his mules and jars of oil? He asked Morgiana what had befallen the oil merchant his guest, whom he had placed under her charge, and she answered, I will tell thee in privacy of this merchant. So Ali Baba went apart with his slave girl, who, taking him without the house, first locked the court door. Then, showing him a jar, she said, Prithee, look into this, and see if within there be oil or aught else. Thereupon, peering inside it, he perceived a man, at which sight he cried aloud, and fain would have fled in his fright. Quoth Morgiana, Fear him not. This man hath no longer the force to work thee harm. He lieth dead and stone dead. Hearing such words of comfort and reassurance, Ali Baba asked, O Morgiana, what evils have we escaped, and by what means hath this wretch become the quarry of fate? She answered, I will inform thee fully of the case, but hush thee, speak not aloud, lest haply the neighbours learn the secret, and it end in our confusion. Look now into all the jars, one by one, from first to last. So Ali Baba examined them severally, and found in each a man fully armed and accoutred, and all lay scalded to death. Hereat, speechless for sheer amazement, he stared at the jars, but presently recovering himself, he asked, And where is he, the oil merchant? Answered she, Of him also I will inform thee. The villain was no trader, but a traitorous assassin, whose honeyed words would have ensnared thee to thy doom. And now I will tell thee what he was and what hath happened. But meanwhile thou art fresh from the hammam, and thou should first drink somewhat of this broth, for thy stomach's and thy health's sake. So Ali Baba went within, and Morgiana served up the mess. After which quoth her master, I fain would hear this wondrous story. Prithee tell it to me, and set my heart at ease. And Morgiana, after telling her story to her master, presently added, This is the whole truth I have related to thee. For some days indeed have I had inkling of such matter, but withheld it from thee, deeming it inexpedient to risk the chance of its meeting the neighbours' ears. Now, however, there is no help but to tell thee thereof. One day, as I came to the house door, I espied thereon a white chalk mark, and on the next day a red sign beside the white. I knew not the intent wherewith the marks were made. Nevertheless, I set others upon the entrances of sundry neighbours, judging that some enemy had done this deed, whereby to encompass my master's destruction. Therefore I made the marks on all the other doors, in such perfect conformity with those I found, that it would be hard to distinguish amongst them. Judge now, and see if these signs and all this villainy be not the work of the bandits of the forest, who marked our house, that on such wise they might know it again. Of these 40 thieves there yet remain 2 others, concerning whose case I know not. So beware of them, but chiefly of the 3rd remaining robber, their captain, who fled hence alive. Take good heed, and be thou cautious of him, for, shouldst thou fall into his hands, he will in no wise spare thee, but will surely murder thee. I will do all that lieth in me to save from hurt and harm thy life and property, nor shall thy slave be found wanting in any service to my lord." Hearing these words, Ali Baba rejoiced with exceeding joyance, and said to her, "I am well pleased with thee for this thy conduct. And say me, what wouldst thou have me do in thy behalf? I shall not fail to remember thy brave deed so long as breath in me remaineth." Quoth she, "It behoveth us, before all things, forthright to bury these bodies in the ground, that so the secret be not known to anyone." Hereupon Ali Baba took with him his slave boy Abdullah into the garden, and there under a tree they dug, for the corpses of the thieves, a deep pit, in size proportionate to its contents, and they dragged the bodies, having carried off their weapons, to the fosse and threw them in. Then, covering up the remains of the 37 robbers, they made the ground appear level and clean, as it wont to be. They also hid the leathern jars and the gear and arms, and presently Ali Baba sent the mules by ones and twos to the bazaar, and sold them all with the able aid of his slave boy Abdullah. Thus the matter was hushed up, nor did it reach the ears of any. However, Ali Baba ceased not to be ill at ease, lest haply the captain or the surviving 2 robbers should wreak their vengeance on his head. He kept himself private with all caution, and took heed that none learn a word of what had happened, and of the wealth which he had carried off from the bandits' cave. Meanwhile, the captain of the thieves, having escaped with his life, fled to the forest in hot wrath and sore irk of mind, and his senses were scattered, and the colour of his visage vanished like ascending smoke. Then he thought the matter over again and again, and at last he firmly resolved that he needs must take the life of Ali Baba, else he would lose all the treasure which his enemy, by knowledge of the magical words, would take away and turn to his own use. Furthermore, he determined that he would undertake the business single-handed, and that after getting rid of Ali Baba, he would gather together another band of banditti, and would pursue his career of brigandage, as indeed his forebears had done for many generations. So he lay down to rest that night, and rising early in the morning, donned a dress of suitable appearance. Then going to the city, alighted at a caravanserai, thinking to himself, "Doubtless the murder of so many men hath reached the wali's ears, and Ali Baba hath been seized and brought to justice, and his house is levelled, and his good is confiscated. The townsfolk must surely have heard tidings of these matters." So he straightway asked of the keeper of the khan, "What strange things have happened in the city during the last few days?" And the other told him all that he had seen and heard, but the captain could not learn a whit of that which most concerned him. Hereby he understood that Ali Baba was ware and wise, and that he had not only carried away such store of treasure, but he had also destroyed so many lives, and withal had come off scatheless. Furthermore, that he himself must needs have all his wits alert, not to fall into the hands of his foe and perish. With this resolve, the captain hired a shop in the bazaar, whither he bore whole bales of the finest stuffs and goodly merchandise from his forest treasure-house. And presently he took his seat within the store, and fell to doing merchant's business. By chance his place fronted the booth of the defunct Qasim, where his son, Ali Baba's nephew, now traded. And the captain, who called himself Khwaja Hassan, soon formed acquaintance and friendship with the shopkeepers around about him, and treated all with profuse civilities, but he was especially gracious and cordial to the son of Qasim, a handsome youth and well-dressed, and oft-times he would sit and chat with him for a long while. A few days after, it chanced that Ali Baba, as he was sometime wont to do, came to see his nephew, whom he found sitting in his shop. The captain saw and recognized him at sight, and one morning he asked the young man, saying, "Prithee, tell me, who is he that ever and anon cometh to thee at thy place of sale?" Whereto the youth made answer, "He is my uncle, the brother of my father." Whereupon the captain showed him yet greater favour and affection, the better to deceive him for his own devices, and gave him presents, and made him sit at meat with him, and fed him with the daintiest of dishes. Presently Ali Baba's nephew bethought him it was only right and proper that he should also invite the merchant to supper. But whereas his own house was small, and he was straitened for room, and could not make a show of splendour, as did Khwaja Hassan, he took counsel with his uncle on the matter. Ali Baba replied to his nephew, "Thou sayest well, it behoveth thee to entreat thy friend in fairest fashion, even as he hath entreated thee. On the morrow, which is Friday, shut thy shop, as do all merchants of repute. Then, after the early meal, take Khwaja Hassan to smell the air, and as thou walkest, lead him hither unawares. Meanwhile, I will give orders that Morgiana shall make ready for his coming the best of viands and all necessaries for a feast. Trouble not thyself on any wise, but leave the matter in my hands." Accordingly, on the next day, to wit, Friday, the nephew of Ali Baba took Khwaja Hassan to walk about the garden, and as they were returning, he led him by the street wherein his uncle dwelt. When they came to the house, the youth stopped at the door, and knocking said, "O my lord, this is my second home. My uncle hath heard much of thee, and desireth with exceeding desire to see thee. So, shouldst thou consent to enter and visit him, I shall be truly glad and thankful to thee." Albeit Khwaja Hassan rejoiced in heart that he had thus found means whereby he might have access to his enemy's house and household, and although he hoped soon to attain his end by treachery, yet he hesitated to enter in, and stood to make his excuses and walk away. But when the door was opened by the slave porter, Ali Baba's nephew seized his companion's hand, and after abundant persuasion led him in, whereat he entered with great show of cheerfulness, as though much pleased and honoured. The housemaster received him with all favour and worship, and asked him of his welfare, and said to him, "O my lord, I am obliged and thankful to thee for that thou hast shown favour to the son of my brother, and I perceive that thou regardest him with an affection even fonder than mine own." Khwaja Hassan replied with pleasant words, and said, "Thy nephew vastly taketh my fancy, and in him I am well pleased, for that although young in years, yet he hath been endued by Allah with much of wisdom." Thus they twain conversed with friendly conversation, and presently the guest rose to depart, and said, "O my lord, thy slave must now farewell thee, but on some future day, inshallah, he will again wait upon thee." Ali Baba, however, would not let him leave, and asked, "Whither wentest thou, O my friend? I would invite thee to my table, and I pray thee sit at meat with us, and after hie thee home in peace." Quoth Khwaja Hassan, "O my lord, I am beholden to thee for thy gracious invitation, and with pleasure would I sit at meat with thee, but for a special reason must I needs excuse myself. Suffer me therefore to depart, for I may not tarry longer, nor accept thy gracious offer." Hereto the host made reply, "I pray thee, O my lord, tell me what may be the reason so urgent and weighty." And Khwaja Hassan answered, "The cause is this. I must not, by order of the physician who cured me lately of my complaint, eat aught of food prepared with salt." Quoth Ali Baba, "And this be all, deprive me not, I pray thee, of the honour thy company will confer upon me. As the meats are not yet cooked, I will forbid the kitchener to make use of any salt. Tarry here a while, and I will return anon to thee." So saying, Ali Baba went in to Morgiana, and bade her not to put salt into any one of the dishes. And she, while busied with her cooking, fell to marvelling greatly at such order, and asked her master, "Who is he that eateth meat wherein is no salt?" He answered, "What to thee mattereth who he may be? Only do thou my bidding." She rejoined, "'Tis well. All shall be as thou wishest." But in mind she wondered at the man who made such strange request, and desired much to look upon him. Wherefore, when all the meats were ready for serving up, she helped the slave boy Abdullah to spread the table and set on the meal. And no sooner did she see Khwaja Hassan than she knew who he was, albeit he had disguised himself in the dress of a stranger merchant. Furthermore, when she eyed him attentively, she espied a dagger hidden under his robe. "So ho," quoth she to herself, "this is the cause why the villain eateth not of salt, for that he seeketh an opportunity to slay my master whose mortal enemy he is. Howbeit I will be beforehand with him, and dispatch him ere he find a chance to harm my lord." Morgiana, having spread a white cloth upon the table and served up the meal, went back to the kitchen and thought out her plot against the robber captain. Now when Ali Baba and Khwaja Hassan had eaten their sufficiency, the slave boy Abdullah brought Morgiana word to serve the dessert, and she cleared the table and set on fruit fresh and dried in salvers. And then she placed by the side of Ali Baba a small tripod for 3 cups with a flagon of wine, and lastly she went off with the slave boy Abdullah into another room, as though she would herself eat supper. Then Khwaja Hassan, that is, the captain of the robbers, perceiving that the coast was clear, exulted mightily, saying to himself, "The time hath come for me to take full vengeance. With one thrust of my dagger I will dispatch this fellow, then escape across the garden and wend my ways. His nephew will not adventure to stay my hand, for an he do but move a finger or toe with that intent, another stab will settle his earthly account. Still must I wait a while, until the slave boy and the cook maid shall have eaten, and lain down to rest them in the kitchen." Morgiana, however, watched him wistfully, and divining his purpose, said in her mind, "I must not allow this villain advantage over my lord, but by some means I must make void his project, and at once put an end to the life of him." Accordingly, the trusty slave girl changed her dress with all haste, and donned such clothes as dancers wear. She veiled her face with a costly kerchief. Around her head she bound a fine turband, and about her middle she tied a waistcloth worked with gold and silver, wherein she stuck a dagger whose hilt was rich in filigree and jewelry. Thus disguised, she said to the slave boy Abdullah, "Take now thy tambourine, that we may play and sing and dance in honour of our master's guest." So he did her bidding, and the twain went into the room, the lad playing and the lass following. Then, making a low congé, they asked leave to perform and disport and play. And Ali Baba gave permission, saying, "Dance now and do your best, that this our guest may be mirthful and merry." Quoth Khwaja Hassan, "O my lord, thou dost indeed provide much pleasant entertainment." Then the slave boy Abdullah, standing by, began to strike the tambourine, whilst Morgiana rose up and showed her perfect art, and pleased them vastly with graceful steps and sportive motion. And suddenly, drawing the poniard from her belt, she brandished it and paced from side to side, a spectacle which pleased them most of all. At times also she stood before them, now clapping the sharp-edged dagger under her armpit, and then setting it against her breast. Lastly, she took the tambourine from the slave boy Abdullah, and still holding the poniard in her right, she went round for largesse, as is the custom amongst merrymakers. First she stood before Ali Baba, who threw a gold coin into the tambourine, and his nephew likewise put in a ducat. Then Khwaja Hassan, seeing her about to approach him, fell to pulling out his purse, when she heartened her heart, and quick as the blinding levin, she plunged the dagger into his vitals, and forthwith the miscreant fell back, stone dead. Ali Baba was dismayed, and cried in his wrath, "O unhappy, what is this deed thou hast done to bring about my ruin?" But she replied, "Nay, O my lord, rather to save thee, and not to cause thee harm, have I slain this man. Loosen his garments, and see what thou wilt discover thereunder." So Ali Baba searched the dead man's dress, and found concealed therein a dagger. Then said Morgiana, "This wretch was thy deadly enemy. Consider him well. He is none other than the oil merchant, the captain of the band of robbers. Whenas he came hither with intent to take thy life, he would not eat thy salt. And when thou toldest me that he wished not any in the meat, I suspected him, and at first sight I was assured that he would surely do thee die. Almighty Allah be praised, 'tis even as I thought." Then Ali Baba lavished upon her thanks and expressions of gratitude, saying, "Lo, these 2 times hast thou saved me from his hand." And falling upon her neck, he cried, See, thou art free, and as reward for this thy fealty, I have wedded thee to my nephew. Then turning to the youth, he said, Do as I bid thee, and thou shalt prosper. I would that thou marry Morgiana, who is a model of duty and loyalty. Thou seest now, yon Khwaja Hassan sought thy friendship only that he might find opportunity to take my life. But this maiden, with her good sense and her wisdom, hath slain him and saved us. Ali Baba's nephew straightway consented to marry Morgiana. After which the three, raising the dead body, bore it forth with all heed and vigilance, and privily buried it in the garden. And for many years no one knew aught thereof. In due time Ali Baba married his brother's son to Morgiana with great pomp, and spread a bride feast in most sumptuous fashion for his friends and neighbours, and made merry with them, and enjoyed singing and all manner of dancing and amusements. He prospered in every undertaking, and time smiled upon him, and a new source of wealth was open to him. For fear of the thieves, he had not once visited the jungle cave wherein lay the treasure, since the day he had carried forth the corpse of his brother Qasim. But some time after, he mounted his hackney one morning, and journeyed thither with all care and caution, till, finding no signs of man or horse, and, reassured in his mind, he ventured to draw near the door. Then alighting from his beast, he tied it up to a tree, and going to the entrance, pronounced the words which he had not forgotten, Open, O Sesame! Hereat, as was its wont, the door flew open, and entering thereby, he saw the goods and hoard of gold and silver untouched, and lying as he had left them. So he felt assured that not one of all the thieves remained alive, and that, save himself, there was not a soul who knew the secret of the place. At once he bound in his saddlecloth a load of gold, such as his horse could bear, and brought it home. And in after days he showed the hoard to his sons, and sons' sons, and taught them how the door could be caused to open and shut. Thus Ali Baba and his household lived all their lives in wealth and joyance, in that city where erst he had been a pauper. And by the blessing of that secret treasure, he rose to high degree and dignities. And Shahrázad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say, with the words, Thus, O auspicious king, endeth the tale of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. And as dawn approached, Scheherazade told the tale of the portress. Know, O Commander of the Faithful, that I had a father who, after fulfilling his time, deceased and left me a great store of wealth. I remained single for a short time, and presently married one of the richest of his day. I abode with him a year, when he also died, and so I became passing rich, and my reputation spread far and wide. One day, as I was sitting at home, behold, there came in to me an old woman with lantern jaws, and cheeks sucked in, and eyes rucked up, and eyebrows scant and scald, and head bare and bald. When the old woman entered, she salaamed to me, and kissing the ground before me, said, I have at home an orphan daughter, and this night are her wedding and her displaying. We be poor folks and strangers in this city, knowing none inhabitant, and we are broken-hearted. So do thou earn for thyself a recompense, and a reward in heaven by being present at her displaying. And when the ladies of this city shall hear that thou art to make act of presence, they also will present themselves. So shalt thou comfort her affliction, for she is sore bruised in spirit, and she hath none to look to, save Allah the Most High. Then she wept and kissed my feet. So pity gat hold on me, and compassion, and I said, Hearing is consenting, and please Allah, I will do somewhat more for her. Nor shall she be shown to her bridegroom, save in my raiment and ornaments and jewelry. At this the old woman rejoiced, and bowed her head to my feet, and kissed them, saying, Allah requite thee weal, and comfort thy heart, even as thou hast comforted mine. So saying, she kissed my hand, and went her ways. So I threw on my mantilla, and making the old crone walk before me, and my handmaidens behind me, I fared till we came to a street well watered and swept neat, where the winnowing breeze blew cool and sweet. Arrived at the gate, before which hung a black curtain, the old woman knocked, and it was opened to us, when we entered and found a vestibule spread with carpets and hung around with lamps all alight, and wax candles and candelabra adorned with pendants of precious gems and noble ores. We passed on through this passage till we entered the saloon, whose like for grandeur and beauty is not to be found in this world. And hardly had we taken note of this, when there came forth from the baldaquin a young lady, and I looked, O Commander of the Faithful, upon a face and form more perfect than the moon when fullest, with a favour brighter than the dawn, gleaming with saffron-hued light. The fair young girl came down from the estrade and said to me, welcome, and good cheer to my sister, the dearly beloved, the illustrious, and 1,000 greetings. Then sat she down and said to me, O my sister, I have a brother who hath had sight of thee at sundry wedding feasts and festive seasons. He is a youth handsomer than I, and he hath fallen desperately in love with thee, for that bounteous destiny hath garnered in thee all beauty and perfection, and he hath given silver to this old woman that she might visit thee, and she hath contrived on this wise to foregather us twain. He hath heard that thou art one of the nobles of thy tribe, nor is he aught less in his, and being desirous to ally his lot with thy lot, he hath practised this device to bring me in company with thee. For he is fain to marry thee after the ordinance of Allah and his apostle, and in what is lawful and right there is no shame. When I heard these words, and saw myself fairly entrapped in the house, I said, hearing is consenting. She was delighted at this, and clapped her hands, whereupon a door opened, and out of it came a young man blooming in the prime of life, exquisitely dressed, a model of beauty and loveliness and symmetry and perfect grace, with gentle winning manners, and eyebrows like a bended bow and shaft on cord, and eyes which bewitched all hearts with sorcery, lawful in the sight of the Lord. When I looked at him, my heart inclined to him, and I loved him, and he sat by my side and talked with me a while, when the young lady again clapped her hands, and behold, a side door opened, and out of it came the Qazi with his 4 assessors as witnesses. And they saluted us, and sitting down, drew up and wrote out the marriage contract between me and the youth, and retired. Then he turned to me and said, be our night blessed, presently adding, O my lady, I have a condition to lay on thee. Quoth I, O my lord, what is that? Whereupon he arose, and fetching a copy of the holy book, presented it to me, saying, swear hereon, thou wilt never look at any other than myself, nor incline thy body or thy heart to him. I swore readily enough to this, and he joyed with exceeding joy, and embraced me round the neck, while love for him possessed my whole heart. Then they set the table before us, and we ate and drank till we were satisfied, but I was dying for the coming of the night. And when night did come, he led me to the bride chamber, and slept with me on the bed, and continued to kiss and embrace me till the morning. Such a night I had never seen in my dreams. I lived with him a life of happiness and delight for a full month, at the end of which I asked his leave to go on foot to the bazaar and buy me certain especial stuffs, and he gave me permission. So I donned my mantilla, and taking with me the old woman and a slave girl, I went to the khan of the silk mercers, where I seated myself in the shop front of a young merchant whom the old woman recommended, saying to me, this youth's father died when he was a boy, and left him great store of wealth. He hath by him a mighty fine stock of goods, and thou wilt find what thou seekest with him, for none in the bazaar hath better stuffs than he. Then she said to him, show this lady the most costly stuffs thou hast by thee. And he replied, hearkening and obedience. Then she whispered me, say a civil word to him. But I replied, I am pledged to address no man save my lord. And as she began to sound his praise, I said sharply to her, we want naught of thy sweet speeches. Our wish is to buy of him whatsoever we need, and return home. So he brought me all I sought, and I offered him his money. But he refused to take it, saying, let it be a gift offered to my guest this day. Then quoth I to the old woman, if he will not take the money, give him back the stuff. By Allah, cried he, not a thing will I take from thee. I sell it not for gold or for silver, but I give it all as a gift for a single kiss, a kiss more precious to me than everything the shop containeth. Asked the old woman, what will the kiss profit thee? And turning to me, whispered, O my daughter, thou hearest what this young fellow saith. What harm will it do thee if he got a kiss from thee, and thou gettest what thou seekest at that price? Replied I take refuge with Allah from such action. Knowest thou not that I am bound by an oath? But she answered, now wist, just let him kiss thee, and neither speak to him nor lean over to him, so shalt thou keep thine oath and thy silver, and no harm whatever shall befall thee. And she ceased not to persuade me and importune me and make light of the matter, till evil entered into my mind, and I put my head in the poke, and declaring I would ne'er consent, consented. So I veiled my eyes, and held up the edge of my mantilla between me and the people passing, and he put his mouth to my cheek under the veil. But while kissing me, he bit me so hard a bite that it tore the flesh from my cheek, and blood flowed fast, and faintness came over me. The old woman caught me in her arms, and when I came to myself, I found the shop shut up, and her sorrowing over me and saying, thank Allah for averting which might have been worse. Then she said to me, come, take heart, and let us go home before the matter become public, and thou be dishonoured. And when thou art safe inside the house, feign sickness, and lie down and cover thyself up. Then I will bring thee powders and plasters to cure this bite withal, and thy wound will be healed at the latest in 3 days. So after a while I arose, and I was in extreme distress, and terror came full upon me. But I went on little by little, till I reached the house, when I pleaded illness, and lay me down. When it was night, my husband came in, and said, what hath befallen thee, O my darling, in this excursion of thine? And I replied, I am not well, my head acheth badly. Then he lighted a candle, and drew near me, and looked hard at me, and asked, what is that wound I see on my cheek, and in the tenderest part too? And I answered, when I went out today with thy leave to buy stuffs, a camel laden with firewood jostled me, and one of the pieces tore my veil and wounded my cheek, as thou seest. For indeed the ways of this city are strait. Tomorrow, said he, I will go complain to the governor, so shall he gibbet every fuel seller in Baghdad. Allah upon thee, said I, burden not thy soul with such sin against any man. The fact is, I was riding on an ass, and it stumbled, throwing me to the ground, and my cheek lighted upon a stick or a bit of glass, and got this wound. Then, said he, tomorrow I will go up to Ja'far the Barmaki, and tell him the story, so shall he kill every donkey boy in Baghdad. Wouldst thou destroy all these men because of my wound, said I, when this which befell me was by decree of Allah and his destiny? But he answered, there is no help for it, and springing to his feet, plied me with words, and pressed me till I was perplexed and frightened. And I stuttered and stammered, and my speech waxed thick, and I said, this is a mere accident by decree of Allah. Then, O Commander of the Faithful, he guessed my case and said, thou hast been false to thine oath. He at once cried out with a loud cry, whereupon a door opened, and in came 7 black slaves, whom he commanded to drag me from my bed and throw me down in the middle of the room. Furthermore, he ordered one of them to pinion my elbows and squat upon my head, and a second to sit upon my knees and secure my feet. And drawing his sword, he gave it to a third and said, strike her, O Sa'ad, and cut her in twain, and let each one take half and cast it into the Tigris, that the fish may eat her. For such is the retribution due to those who violate their vows and are unfaithful to their love. Then he repeated to the slave, smite her, O Sa'ad. And when the slave, who was sitting upon me, made sure of the command, he bent down to me and said, O my mistress, repeat the profession of faith, and bethink thee if there be anything thou wouldst have done, for verily this is the last hour of thy life. He again cried out to the slave, cut her in half, and free us from her, for we have no profit of her. So the slave drew near me, O Commander of the Faithful, and I ceased bandying verses, and made sure of death, and despairing of life, committed my affairs to Almighty Allah. When behold, the old woman rushed in, and threw herself at my husband's feet, and kissed them, and wept, and said, O my son, by the rights of my fosterage, and by my long service to thee, I conjure thee pardon this young lady, for indeed she hath done nothing deserving such doom. Thou art a very young man, and I fear lest her death be laid at thy door, for it is said, Whoso slayeth shall be slain. As for this wanton, since you deemest her such, drive her out from thy doors, from thy love, and from thy heart. And she ceased not to weep and importune him, till he relented and said, I pardon her, but needs must I set on her my mark, which shall show upon her all her life. Then he bade the slaves drag me along the ground, and lay me out at full length, after stripping me of all my clothes. And when the slaves had so sat upon me that I could not move, he fetched in a rod of quince tree, and came down with it upon my body, and continued beating me on the back and sides, till I lost consciousness from excess of pain, and I despaired of life. Then he commanded the slaves to take me away as soon as it was dark, together with the old woman, to show them the way, and throw me upon the floor of the house wherein I dwelt before my marriage. They did their lord's bidding, and cast me down in my old home, and went their ways. I lay in weekly case, and confined to my bed for 4 months, before I was able to rise, and health returned to me. At the end of that time, I went to the house where all this had happened, and found it a ruin. The street had been pulled down endlong, and rubbish heaps rose where the building erst was. Nor could I learn how this had come about. Then I betook myself to this my sister on my father's side. I saluted her, and told her what had betided me, and the whole of my story, and she said, O my sister, who is safe from the despite of time, and secure? Thanks be to Allah, who hath brought thee off safely. And she began to say, Such is the world, so bear a patient heart, when riches leave thee, and when friends depart. And such is my story. And Shahrázad perceived the dawn of day, and ceased saying her permitted say. And so it came to pass that, when Scheherazade had told her tales for 1,000 nights and a night, and had bored King Shahryar 3 sons, the king declared that he would no longer hold over her the threat of execution, having never ere now found such fidelity and beauty united in one woman. Thus they lived together for many a year in perfect tranquility and affection, the king ruling over his kingdom with justice so exemplary that he was once again beloved by all the people.